Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Wanted, Dead or Alive, by excusxme. After taking Akainu's hit for his brother, Ace was sure that it was the end. That was until he woke up buried underground, in a coffin. After finding out 2 years have passed since his death, Ace goes in search of answers, trying to unwrap what has happened in the 2 years he was gone. Adios.
Ace twitched slightly, sounds gradually making their way to his ears, followed by the sound someone calling. "Get up, you idiotic!" The tone faltered, replaced by a hand suddenly gripping the fire thrower's cloak and shaking him desperately. Damn it, just wake up." "I'm awake," Ace barely uttered out, causing for the figure beside him to jolt from its spot. Instantly placing its hands on the freckled man's shoulders, the voice looked at him directly in the eyes, it biting down on its lip hesitantly. "What?" it started, causing for Ace to blink. The hell was that? Staring curiously at the figure, Ace continued to blink, his features slightly blank. "That?" he re-asked, before holding his hand up to his forehead. "Damn it, it's the first time that's happened in a while, that's for sure." Tensing, the figure gradually lifted its hands from the ex-commander's shoulder, its eyebrows raising. "That? You don't know?" Ace asked, stumbling up from where he had fell. "Am I supposed to know what?" Gritting its teeth, the voice crossed its arms over its chest, facing away from the fire thrower. "That you randomly collapse sometimes? Of course I don't." Brushing off the dirt that was now smothering his cloak, Ace frowned, before smirking towards the voice. "Well, that makes you a pretty shit for a guardian angel. How are you supposed to protect me if you don't know something as important as that?" Sarcasm ringing his tone, Ace slowly looked around the hall, his pupils landing on the recently shattered wall. Snorting, the voice raised its eyebrows once more, though humor uttered its eyes. "A guardian angel? You have to be kidding me." "Well, what else could you be?" Letting his smirk stick to his lips, Ace stepped closer towards the voice, bending down to its height. Instantly narrowing its eyes, the voice looked away, not saying a word. Sighing in defeat, Ace threw up his hands, letting out a deep breath. "Fine brat, be mysterious and annoyingly stubborn. But I will find out." Leaning back up, the fire thrower re-looked around the hall, his pupils narrowing. "Well, what now?" Letting its arms fall from its chest, the voice mumbled, before its eyes lighted up. "Hey, do you still have that piece of paper that the irritable woman gave to you?" Blinking, Ace tilted his head slightly. "The irritable woman? You mean Howard?" His words suddenly halting, the fire thrower instantly reached into his pocket, a grin spreading across his face. Recognizing the grin on his face, the voice slowly took a step towards him, its arms spreading out. "Wait a second, don't you want to? Maybe I don't know. Think about what that warning or message on that piece of paper means first." Replying with a dangerous smirk, Ace looked towards the end of the hall, fisting his hand into the air as he started to walk forward. "I didn't think you'd be one to be scared, seeing as you pushed me off a Colosseum and ow." Interrupting his words, the voice sighed, following after the fire thrower with a frown and childish words. "Me scared? I'm about as scared as you are. Actually even less." Glancing down at the piece of paper, Ace focused his attention onto the place marked, before placing the paper back in the pocket. "We shouldn't be hanging around here then. After all, Vista said that Marco was around where this is marked, so..." His voice faltering at the edges, Ace bit the edge of his lip, before continuing his steps down the narrowed caved-in hall. Nodding, the voice caught up to where the fire thrower was heading, throwing its hands to the back of its head with a sigh. "Fine then. Let's go put a stop to this tournament," earning a small smirk to itself. The voice ignored the slightly stunned look directed at him from the ex-commander. Chuckling under his breath, Ace nodded, before lighting his way down the shadowed hall ahead. Shouldn't you be stopping him or something?" Buggy stuttered, his shaking hand hesitantly pointing over to the bustling arena. There, before all of them stood the disguised Straw Hat Captain, surrounded aimlessly by the fellow contestants which had easily been knocked out. The three of them sat there among the crowd of screaming spectators, all shocked at what they were seeing. The swordsman quickly grunted, his glare aiming instantly over to where the clown sat, earning a small chuckle from Robin. Luffy knows what he's doing. Zoro finally responded, his arms crossed over and eye narrowed on the said captain. Robin nodded slightly, her own eyes glued to the teen's ridiculous outfit. Zoro is right. Luffy wouldn't enter this tournament obliviously without, she sighed, thinking it through first. She stated, though her tone was unsure. Hearing a small, HMPH voice from the swordsman beside her, she stirred, her eyes glazing over slightly. But this is Luffy we're talking about. Running into something he thought about is exactly the reason you should interfere. The clown exclaimed, causing a confused stare utter from Zoro's eye. And why would you care? He bluntly asked, his eye once more narrowing. Flailing slightly, the clown cleared his throat, standing up proudly in the midst of the crowds, before Robin pulled him back down. I have no idea what you're talking about. I couldn't care less if he died today. Letting out a bellowing laugh, Buggy instantly went quiet, being hit by the continued stares from the Straw Hat Pirates. You're a terrible liar, Sir Buggy. Robin clearly pointed out, her voice taunting him with a small giggle. We have already been through this before, it is wise not to lie. After all, Mr. Swordsman here especially despises liars, isn't that right? Glancing her way over to the confused swordsman, a sudden realization hit her, the said swordsman letting out a small chuckle of his own. You can add clowns to that as well. So, Robin continued on, her smile widening as she noticed a gulp sound from the Shichibukai beside her. If you would tell us why you are so interested in our captain's safety, I'm sure Swordsman-san would overlook the matter. Swallowing, Buggy glanced sheepishly to the side. It's just, he started, before pointing determinedly towards Zoro. I wouldn't normally share this information with lower ranks, but I have considered the possibility of teaming up with your captain, despite the privilege I know he would receive. Both blinking at the clown's statement in silence, Robin and Zoro tilted their heads, before the swordsman bluntly declared, he's joking, right? Thinking along the same lines herself, Robin turned towards Zoro. Her eyes widened, I don't think he is. Seeing the pirate's reactions, Buggy continued on, placing a hand on his own chest as he pointed his nose towards the sky. I know, you are unable to believe someone like me would consider. Robin quickly interrupted, her features hardened. And what makes you think we would accept you, Buggy? We are aware that you and Captain San have history, but I highly doubt that's a reason you would want to ally with us. Glaring at the interruption, Buggy chewed the side of his mouth, a pout appearing on his lips. Yes. You're right, but don't think I would tell such lower ranks like yourselves why. Cut off once more, Zoro abruptly stood up from the seat, his hand hovering over the array of swords by his side as the little patience he had ran out. That's it, the bastard had it coming to him the whole time. Sighing, Robin instinctively went to calm the swordsman down, before a range of gasps and cheers erupted around them. Returning her sights to the center of the arena, she instantly gasped, her pupils widened. Hearing a similar stutter beside her which was easily recognizable as the clown, he finally formed words, his tone in disbelief. It's him. Him? Zoro quickly asked, causing Robin to glance over to him. Seeing no recognition of the man standing beside their captain in his eyes, she gave a small sigh. That there is the captain of the new Whitebeard pirates, she explained, before a confused stare was peered over toward Captain. Retaking his seat, the swordsman eyebrows raised, his eyes slowly narrowing. And what's he doing here, oh? Twitching at the realization, Zoro grunted, before Robin spoke up once more. It looks like they're about to fight, she stated, causing both Buggy and Zoro to sound a disbelieving, eh? Luffy. The swordsman muttered, his eyes studying his captain's. Seeing the sudden joyful look placed on Luffy's face, Zoro gulped, leaning back as he placed his hand over his face. You might not want to win this one. Narrowing her eyebrows, Robin glanced over to the swordsman. She hummed, her head tilting slightly. I wouldn't think you of all people Swordsman-san would say something like that. Shaking his head, Zoro mumbled under his breath, before letting out a deep sigh. It's not that, he stated, leaning forward towards the people in front. I believe Luffy can win this. But, his voice faltered, his eyes suddenly overlooking Buggy. Hey Buggy. You're certain that the man you brought to this island looked like Ace? Not expecting such a question, the clown nodded uncertainly, before clearing his throat. Yes, I am sure of it. Then we better find him quick. Looking towards Robin with a hardened stare, Zoro stiffened, his eyes etching back to the now laughing captain. Nodding, Robin intertwined her fingers, before stating clearly, if you're certain that someone looking like Ace is here, then I suggest we do the same thing. Though, joining Zoro in her stare towards Luffy, she unknowingly narrowed her eyes. Let's just hope we find him before this is all over. You don't seem to be dealing with this too well, Koala stated bluntly, ignoring the sudden jolt from her partner as she flung a souvenir candy in her mouth. Letting out a small breath, Sabo leaned back into the stone wall, his eyes glued on the small gladiator battling his way through the arena swarmed with contestants. His pupils glazed over, Sabo smiled weakly, before looking regrettably towards Koala. I haven't seen him for 12 years. The blonde finally uttered out, his tone hushed. He's... Drawing his breath in, he glanced back over to the gladiator, his mouth slowly drooping. He's going to hate me, for what I did. Swinging her legs back and forth, Koala mumbled, her finger placed on her chin. Nope, I personally think if he was to be mad at something you did, then it would be at something you didn't do. Instantly glaring towards the innocent-looking girl, Sabo cursed, placing his chin in his palm as he continued to watch the gladiator fight. As if I didn't know that already. Then just explain it to him. Koala continued on, throwing another ball-shaped candy into her mouth. If he's as forgiving as you said he was, then he would understand the reason you couldn't be there. Tilting her head back so her eyes met Sabo's, Koala's eyebrows raised tirelessly. That is, saying that you want to be forgiven in the first place. He thinks I'm dead. Yawning, Koala stretched out her arms, ignoring the sulking actions of the blonde. Well, he's wrong. Glaring once more at the bob-hatted woman, Sabo brought his head down to his knees, refusing to look at the arena anymore. I wasn't even there for when Ace, his words shaking slightly, Sabo shook his head. His eyes narrowed. I'm telling you, Koala, he isn't going to want to see me, and if that happens. Flinging her hands in front of the blonde, Koala instantly shook her hand, a tut whispering from her lips. Now, Sabo. This was your idea. Don't go blaming the faults in your plan for something I am not guilty for. Seeing no recognition of understanding in the blonde's pupils, Koala rolled her eyes, before harshly patting the back of his coat. You'll be fine. You're old enough to go out there and face your demons. Winking, Koala smirked at her own words, before turning her attention back to the fight below. Hearing the roar of victory swarm the seats in the Colosseum, Koala's eyes perked up, letting a small chuckle pass her lips. No way. Hearing a small whisper utter out next to her, Koala smirked, crossing her legs simultaneously as she chuckled once more. That's your weak younger brother, she asked with a hint of amusement, her smirk only widening as she saw the blonde nod weakly. Before her, standing in the midst of the defeated arena lay the elder man, his fists clenched and his eyes overshadowed. Brushing the dry dust from the candy off her palms, Koala continued on, her smirk deflating slightly. I take it back. He doesn't look like the forgiving type. Directing an innocent smile to the blonde once again, Koala giggled, chucking another sweet into her mouth. Well, good luck with that, Sabo. Groaning, Sabo once again held his head in his hand, before another cheer erupted the arena, grabbing the attention of the duo. It's him, they look like they're about to fight. Damn it, this can only end bad. Glancing towards the center of the arena, Koala raised her eyebrows, though was unsurprised by the fellow contestant who stood beside Luffy. You were right. Sabo mumbled quietly next to her, causing Koala to tut once more. Oh, she questioned, her eyebrows raising. You didn't believe me? She asked with a tint of curiosity, the blonde only responding in a mild hum. Intertwining his fingers together, Sabo narrowed his eyes at the Whitebeard captain, before his sight returned to his brother. No, I just didn't think Luffy would actually fight against him. His eyes glazing over once more, the blonde smiled, letting out a deep sigh. But I guess that's just like him, doing something idiotic. Letting out a hum of agreement, Koala nodded, before placing the bag of candies on the floor with a frown. Let's just hope his idiocy doesn't cost him anything more than a few scratches. We have enough people we have to save already." Catching her words, the blonde lifted his head up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Enough. There's only Haruta who we have to comprehend." His memory returning, Sabo faced the bob-hatted girl straight on, his tone more commanding. "Koala. Is it about what you wouldn't tell me? The previous light conversation gone?" Sabo stared knowingly at the woman, piecing together her words. "Who else is here?" Directing her stare towards her knees, Koala bit down edgily on her lip, her head tilting to the side. "I already told you, Sabo. There's nothing to worry about. I have it under control." His eyes widening slightly, Sabo blinked, before letting out a frustrated groan. "That doesn't make me feel any better, you know." Letting out a sigh, Koala regained her smile, before looking back towards the duo of fighters standing in the arena. "So, what now?" "We'll watch him," Sabo replied instantly, his tone becoming slightly hitched once more. "Let him," he started, his voice hinted with regret. "Let him fight." Not expecting the blonde to resign to watching, Koala tilted her head to the side. "Oh?" she questioned, her eyes slowly darting back to the duo in the arena. Hearing only silence echo around the blonde, she sighed, giving a small nod. "Okay. But you better be right about this though, Sabo. After all, this is your plan." "I'm sure," Sabo whispered out, his eyes still glued onto the center of the arena. "Be sure to be ready to act, Koala." Smirking, Koala added another sweet to her mouth, before winking once more at the blonde. "Got it." Stepping out onto the recently cleared arena, the Phoenix's eyes glazed over. He didn't want to do this, not really, but he had to. Clenching his fingers, Marco let out a deep breath, focusing his sight onto the open arena ahead of him. Surrounding him lay collapsed guards, all stirring with mumbled words. The Phoenix continued to walk forward, ignoring the confused stutters falling out of their mouths. Feeling the warm breeze brush past him, he made his way into the light. Halting, the blonde stared, hearing a quake echo from below. Furrowing his eyebrows, he quickly glanced towards a small, open door leading into a darkened hallway. Hearing the floor once more, the blonde quickly opted to walk towards the door, before looking back at the lone victor waiting in the arena. Catching his eye, the said victor blinked widely, his head tilting the side. Shoving away his curiosity, Marco stepped back, heading once more towards the straw-hatted captain as the crowd started to cheer widely. "Isn't that the winner of the previous section? What is he doing here? Shouldn't the guards keep him out? Maybe he—" Blocking out the rest of their words, the Phoenix locked eyes with the teen who was mirroring his exact stare. Seeing the slight shuffle in his steps, Marco raised an eyebrow as Luffy made his way over to him, a small smile placed on his lips. "What are you?" he started, his voice hushed under the roar of the crowds. As the teen neared him, he slowly began to lift up his arm, making Marco up his guard and prepare for the early attack. However, the teen continued to hold out his hand, his eyes not leaving the Phoenix's. "For Ace," he simply stated, causing for Marco's pupils to widen slightly. The teen gave him a weakened smile, but a smile nonetheless. Glancing down to the still hovering hand, Marco's features softened, taking a hold of the hand with a mirrored smile. "It'll be interesting to fight you, Straw Hat." The teen hummed, slowly letting go of the grasped hand as he tilted his head. "Oh," Luffy mumbled, his eyes glazing over as he continued to stare at the blonde. Letting his hand fall to his side, the Phoenix once again questioned what the other was thinking, before a sigh escaped the teen's lips. "What?" he seemed to ask casually, despite the tension shared a few moments ago. "I don't want to fight you," Luffy bluntly stated out of the blue, causing for the blonde to raise his eyebrow once more. "Oh, you say that like I was the one that proposed this fight?" Marco stated with a tint of amusement, watching as the teen's face scrunched up. Crossing his arms over one another, Luffy grumbled, his eyes darting to the side. "But you said you were going to take the fruit. So it's obvious that we'd have to fight." It was true, Marco couldn't allow for the teen to take the fruit without himself disposing of it first. But it seemed that the kid thought the same thing as well, to Marco's disadvantage. "Then I guess there's no other choice," Marco exclaimed with a sigh, placing both his hands inside his pockets. Luffy nodded with agreement, his features still hardened. I'm going to be the one that takes Ace's fruit, even if I have to fight you." Ignoring the sudden shouts of the wakened guards, Marco nodded, lifting his palm up towards the straw-hatted boy. Instinctively taking a step back, the teen jumped back, allowing for the armor he previously had on to fall onto the ground. "Isn't that Straw Hat Luffy?" "It can't be." Letting flames slowly flicker across his arm, Marco picked up his steps, preparing for the battle ahead. Gritting his teeth, the phoenix mumbled under his breath, before aiming his heel towards the shoulder of the teen. "Forgive me, Ace." Ace was never one to admit he'd had troubles throughout his life. There would have been too many to count from. There had been times when his mouth had caused him to be chased out of a town, banned from the certain bar for life. Other times had been a lot more amusing, as the freckled man learned to never, ever mess with his brother's belongings on board, a result that always ended up with him being thrown in the sea. Then there had been the more severe times, ones that never left the fire thrower's mind. He had to admit, yet again he was lost. Completely and utterly lost. He was currently stuck underneath the tunnels of Dressrosa with a small piece of paper to direct him to a place he doesn't know where, along with an imaginary figure which loved to complain at him. "Do we even know where we're going?" Growling under his breath, the ex-commander sighed, bringing his palm towards his forehead with a grin. "I have an idea." "You have no clue, do you?" Twitching, Ace glared momentarily towards the voice, before smiling silently to himself. Catching this, the voice jolted back slightly, sending him a small glare of its own. "What?" His smile fading, the fire thrower shook his head with a small chuckle, continuing his sight onto the road ahead. "It's nothing." Kicking the countless stones ahead of it to the side with a slight mumble, the voice, HMPH ed, its eyes scanning Ace's features before turning away. Crossing its arms over one another, it finally started to take in its surrounding, a small crease forming on its forehead. "Oi, haven't we just passed this place?" Folding its arm out to point towards the shattered rock fall in front of them, the voice frowned, followed by a small gulp by the fire thrower. "Shit, we couldn't have just been going round in a circle." "Yeah." Turning towards Ace with a snarl, the voice's eyebrows furrowed, before glancing at the small paper in the freckled man's hand. "Here, give that to me, I'll do it." Not expecting the voice to say such a thing, Ace stepped back, his head tilting slightly to the side. "You want to take lead?" the ex-commander said with amusement, before letting out a laugh. "Yeah kid, not happening." Twitching once more, the voice scowled, clenching its fists together at the side. "It's better than just letting you take us on a tour to nowhere." "Tell you what," the fire thrower stated, his eyes narrowing. "You tell me who you are, and I'll happily give you this." Gesturing to the piece of paper, Ace smirked, enjoying the slow defeat showing on the voice's features, before his hands began to feel light. "Wah?" Walking up to the freckled man with an irritated face, the voice snatched the paper from the fire thrower easily, causing him to stumble back and stare at the voice with confusion. "How the fuck did you Ignoring the questions plummeting from the ex-commander's mouth, the voice smirked itself, its eyes scanning over the paper. Forming a frown on its lips, it briefly glanced towards Ace before walking forward. "Let's go then." Still in slight shock, Ace's eyes followed the voice's figure, before running towards it. "How the hell did you do that?" he finally asked, his eyes glued to the small hands clutching the piece of paper. "You mean take it off you?" the voice asked dully, not even bothering to look up towards the fire thrower. "It was easy. All I had to do was reach up and grab it. Are you blind or something?" "But you can't do that." Ace started, his eyebrows furrowed and confused. "You're not real," he stated like it was obvious, causing for the voice to twitch on the spot. Silently continuing on with the passage, the voice mumbled something, unbeknown to the fire thrower, causing Ace to lower his suspicions. "What is it?" "It's nothing." Letting out a sigh, Ace slowed his steps, keeping in time with the voice. "Well, it's obvious that there's something wrong." "Oh yeah, like you're really concerned." Grinning, the fire thrower chuckled slightly, before tuning out his words with amusement. Placing his finger up into the air, he ignored the slight confusion on the voice's face, continuing on. "When you're a voice in my head." Placing his second finger in the air, Ace's grin faltered, turning into a more pissed-off feature on his lips. "And two, it looks like you're not going anywhere, so I'm stuck with you either way. The last thing I want is an irritated brat on my shoulder after all. That's not my name, pirate. Ignoring the remark, Ace sighed, placing his palm over his head. Oh, then what is? Because I would have no problem in you correcting me. Biting down on its lip, the voice stubbornly faced forward, its eyebrows furrowed and cheeks puffed out childishly. Narrowing its eyes hazily, the voice's steps slowly stopped, coming to a halt with a small mumble. It's probably nothing anyway. It's just I heard who Haruto was meeting. Looking behind him with confusion, Ace raised his eyebrows, slight curiosity flowing through his eyes. And, what? It's someone you know? Biting harshly down on its lip more, the voice slowly opened to say something, before closing its mouth once more. Something like that. It replied with all emotion drained from its voice. Walking past the fire thrower hastily, the voice continued to stay quiet, Ace simply following behind. After a while, the duo finally came to another halt, Ace twitching on the spot. Oi. Don't, was the instant response from the voice, its eyes looking everywhere. Peering his eyes down to the ground, Ace gritted his teeth, pointing to the pile of rocks before them with irritation. His eyes narrowed. You got us just as lost as I did. You were distracting me. Oh, and how the hell did I do that? Shut up, pirate. Twitching, Ace hit his head against the wall with a groan, his face scrunched up by the sudden pain. Choosing to ignore it for now, Ace let out a sigh, before eyeing the wall with a blank look. Light. Placing his palm fully onto the wall ahead, Ace grew a small smirk, slowly knocking on the sodden wall with eager eyes. There's light behind here. Its eyebrows raising, the voice edged closer to the pirate with a small huff. See, I told you I knew where we were going. Blankly looking at the voice for a split of a second, the fire thrower chuckled, bringing his hand back in the shape of the fist. Stand back. Before the voice had time to argue that maybe punching down yet another wall might not help their situation or the fact that it might knock down the surroundings above them, the ex-commander had flown his fist directly into the center of the wall, easily smashing it into pieces. Letting a proud smirk to utter its way onto his lips, Ace placed both his hands on his hips, causing the voice to twitch at the sight. I give up. You're either suicidal or just insane. Tilting his head, Ace looked questionably at the brat, before quickly shrugging it off. Wincing his eyes at the light of the room ahead, Ace fumbled forward, crunching the small rocks under his feet with ease. The room ahead was bright, way brighter than the hallway they had just been in. Its decor was completely a world away as well, for the brick walls seemed to be tinted in a golden color, unlike the dull, dirty tunnels they had just escaped from. The light was quickly sourced from a giant metal goblet placed on the wall, lighting the room with a similar golden color to the walls. It was unexpected to the two figures who had just been wandering through sewer-like tunnels, but definitely brought their attention to where they were. Ace started, his eyes darting everywhere. Where are we? He questioned, his voice lighter than before. That's stepping forward to where the fire thrower was standing, the voice blinked. Its eyes widened with the sight of everything. Stumbling forward to touch the golden walls, the voice looked astounded, before turning back to face the ex-commander. What I was thinking. Continuing to scan the room for any sign on the person Haruto was supposed to meet, Ace let out a small sigh, Lee with a huff. So what do we do now? The voice questioned with curiosity, causing Ace to mumble out tiredly. We wait. No one spoke a word, all was completely silent. Luffy didn't know how to react to this. He knew that from what Frankie had told him it would be best not to reveal himself, but Pineapple Head had already shown himself, so he saw no point in staying in the large metal outfit he had on. Glancing over to the said Pineapple who was standing opposite him, Luffy furrowed his eyebrows, unable to tell why he was staring at him in amusement. Did he look funny? Maybe he was missing the cool armor he was wearing. Frowning, the teen looked down with a pout at the metal laying on the floor. Shrugging it off, the straw-hatted teen stretched out his arms, clenching them in time with his footsteps. The sound of the audience seemed to come back by now, people gasping in horror as they put together what was happening. They're going to fight, but that doesn't make sense. Why would they? Perhaps the Whitebeard captain despises Straw Hat. His ears picking up at this, Luffy briefly looked towards the man, his eyebrows furrowing. What? From what he just picked up off Pineapple, He seemed to have nothing against Luffy. After all, he was one of Ace's crewmates. Luffy saw no reason why they wouldn't get along. Oh, his eyes suddenly narrowing towards the ground, the straw-hatted teen released his grip on his fingers, his pupils glazing over. He was the reason Ace was dead. Gritting his teeth at the thought, Luffy shook his head, shaking away the stinging feeling in his eyes. Breathing out heavily, the teen re-looked towards the Whitebeard captain, reminding himself why he was here. Reforming his stance, Luffy quickly yelled out to the blonde with all his might, his tone more committed than before. "I don't care who you are," he started, the Whitebeard captain looking slightly surprised. "You could be anyone, a marine, a pirate. Even Ace's crewmate." His voice faltering at his brother's name slightly, the teen stumbled backwards, before raising his fists into the sky. "But I'm not leaving this island, without Ace's fruit." Not leaving any time for the blonde to respond, Luffy leapt into the sky with ease, appearing above the Whitebeard captain instantly. Gear 3rd. Biting harshly down onto his thumb, the teen blew quickly into the rubber which expanded, raising his fist up once more and slamming it down towards the Whitebeard captain. Almost simultaneously as the attack formed, Marco leapt from his spot to the side, the tips of his fingers coming into harsh contact with the dusted ground below. Letting the flames reach to the said fingertips, the blonde was able to quickly dodge the swing of the rubber teen's arm towards him, leading him to hang off the side of the arena's walls. Allowing for the blue flames to ignite down the base of his arm, Marco easily glided towards where the rubber teen last attacked, directing his foot towards the sole part of the boy's head. Turning around in rhythm with the blonde's attack, the teen lifted his arm up instantly, forming contact with the edge of Marco's heel painfully. Hockey. Twitching at the impact, Luffy instantly flew back into the far side of the arena, Marco quickly following him. Coughing out a spit of blood from his mouth, Luffy lifted himself up from the shattered wall behind him, wiping the red liquid away from his lips casually. Spotting the man racing towards him with blue flames, the teen stretched out his arm towards the ledges above, just about missing the next attack the blonde had formed. Quickly looking down to the blonde's features to recatch his breath, Luffy's eyes widened to see the calm look still registered on the phoenix's face, his breathing controlled and body unharmed. A phoenix? The word clicked in Luffy's mind, hearing the voice of his archaeologist explaining the creature to him. "They say," Robin started, her voice still echoing in the back of his mind as the teen dodged yet another attack from the blonde, "that if you ever come across a blue phoenix." Hearing the screams of the crowd hiding near to where he was standing, Luffy instantly backed away from the wall, wrapping his legs around the banister and pushing himself off with all his strength. Sending himself over to the opposite side of the arena, the rubber teen was able to briefly tell where Marco had been earning a gulp from his lips as he saw the damage the wall was sustaining. That it'd be best not to agitate it. "Da damn it," the rubber teen muttered to himself, gritting the ground below with his nails, before rushing over to where the blonde was perched. Flinging his hand back behind him to stretch, Luffy was able to twist it instantly in time to reach where the blonde was standing, yelling out fiercely as his fist brushed against the side of Marco's cheek. "Gomu Gomu no rifle." For no matter how hard you try, watching as the blonde retreated to the far right of the arena, Luffy inwardly gulped, his eyes glued to the long streak of blood falling from the side of the phoenix's face. If you see it in its true form. Unexpected to the teen, a small tint of blue flickered from the wound, easily being recognized as the flames which covered the blonde before. You cannot harm it in any way. Watching the flame with confusion, Luffy's mouth slowly went agape, his pupils trembling as his voice uttered out a small mumble. "What's that?" For a phoenix can never die. In place from where the small wound was a completely bare piece of skin, the blood slowly dripping off the healed spot with ease. The blonde simply sighed at this, wiping it away calmly and straightening his back out once more. "It healed?" Luffy questioned breathlessly to himself, his head turning in confusion. Shrugging of the minor detail for now, the teen clenched his fists and started to run towards the blonde determinedly, activating his haki while dodging the blonde's attack from above. Biting down on his lip, Marco slammed down into the ground below, gritting his nails into the dust as he whipped the leg around, twitching as it connected with the rubber teens running. Tripping for a split of a second, Luffy scowled, flinging his arm out to the crumbled ledge once more. Seeing this, Marco allowed the blue flames to echo down to his heels, flicking them up towards Straw Hat's head before he reached the walls of the arena. Successfully connecting this attack, Luffy was flown harshly towards the ground, his face coming in painful contact with the pointed stones below. Taking this as another chance to attack, Marco whisked beside where the rubber teen was kicked, placing his foot directly into the sky and kicking it down to the spot where Luffy lay. Able to anticipate this attack, Luffy rolled instantly to the side with a wince, covering his face as the attack hit the floor beside him with a bang. Acting out as a chance to escape for a brief moment, Luffy jumped back, once again wiping the blood dripping from the left side of his cheek. Punching the ground below, the rubber teen fiercely looked in the direction of the blonde, ignoring the slight burning sensation steaming from his skin. "Gear second," he uttered out, between his teeth, inwardly thankful that the blonde had stopped to take a breath. As soon as the rubber teen leapt out to where he was previously standing, Marco mirrored the same action, flinging himself directly towards the wall before allowing for the blue flames perched on his heels to flicker away. Swallowing harshly, the blonde twitched, recognizing a small pain lingering on his right heel. Inwardly cursing at this, Marco let the flames travel down the length of his arms, before using them to reach the straw-hatted teen quickly, rotating his body backwards so he could power up a front kick towards the rubber teen's chest. Unknowing of this, Luffy placed his left palm straight in front of him, his other arm clenched and raised in a fist. Seeing the blonde quickly making his way towards him, ridding the words from his mouth. "Gomu Gomu no. Bullet," stretching out the arm behind him, the skin instantly darkened to a metallic color, the fist appearing centimeters away from the blonde's face within seconds. His eyes widening in time with the attack, Marco was forced slightly back, his hand clasping one of the broken rocks with shortened breaths. Straining to keep his eyes open, the blonde raised his hand into the air, allowing for the deadly blue flames to echo down it once more. Scanning the side of the rubber teen, Marco frowned, guilt easily welling up in his eyes as he saw the state the teen was in. Not noticing the scars that lay on the teen from the previous fights before, Marco gulped, his teeth clenching together tightly. This was Ace's brother, someone that Ace treasured dearly. He easily remembers the times that the firehead would ramble off about him, telling him about the many stupid but marvelous things the small rubber kid would do. And each time, Ace was always found with the same gentle smile, his eyes always glazed over in thought. He remembers the time when the kid's first bounty came out, amused to see how excited the freckled man was to proudly show everyone the poster. Not to mention, that Ace was willing to sacrifice himself for the teen. Clenching his fist together more harshly than before, Marco winced at the sight of blood dripping from his fingers, before his sight was once more launched onto the small rubber teen. Taking in the small figure which was breathless and hurt, Marco narrowed his eyes, letting go of the boulder and slowly walking towards Luffy. He couldn't do it, it was as simple as that. The Phoenix couldn't bring himself to maim the one person that Ace held dear. Though obviously the simple-minded teen didn't think the same way, for within a few seconds a straw hat was facing a few meters away from the blonde. A fist taking away that sight instantly and connecting towards the center of Marco's chest. Able to only slightly back off most of the attack, Marco was quickly whisked to the opposite end of the arena, barely missing the water behind. Eyeing the water that was a few inches away, the blonde let out a deep breath, before looking back towards the rubber teen. Brushing off the debris scattered on him, the blonde narrowed his eyebrows, trying to figure out how to stop the straw-hatted teen before either of them got hurt. Just as Marco was stepping out towards the teen, a huge explosion sounded a few inches away from both Phoenix and Straw Hat, causing screams to echo everywhere in the arena. Holding his arm up to block out the debris flying towards him, Marco scowled, focusing his eyes onto the lone figure who stood in the midst of the explosion. "Wah?" the rubber teen mumbled under his breath, also blocking his eyes with his arm, wincing at the sight of the figure. Almost instantly as the words exited his mouth, the figure rushed up to the duo, grabbing them unexpectedly by the collars and dragging them to the shadowed corner of the Colosseum entrance. Yelping in surprise, The rubber teen instantly looked towards the figure with slight irritation, clenching his fists down to his side and furrowing his eyebrows. "Oh, why did you do that?" Rubbing the back of his neck with a frown, the blonde sighed deeply, before glancing up towards the figure. Before them stood a small, agile-looking woman, smirking proudly to herself. The woman wasn't that detailed herself, but it was the way she seemed to carry herself that perked Marco's interest. She wore a particularly uninteresting bob hat, which easily covered the area of her hair. Her hair itself was in similar shape of the bob hat, sitting happily on her shoulders, tinted with a light hazel color. She wore simple clothing, nothing that stood out to the expecting eye, but did carry a set of knives which was easily visible to anyone who wanted to look. All in all, she wasn't someone that Marco would have expected to interrupt a battle such as his and Straw Hat's, but made sure not to take the girl lightly. Pouting out her lip, the girl sighed, running her fingers through her hair with a mumble. "Damn it, Sabo. Leaving all the crappy jobs to me." Ignoring her pointless whisper for now, Marco stood up from where he'd been dragged, once again brushing himself off of the debris he was covered in. Wincing at the touch of his chest, the blonde frowned, lightly tapping his right ankle on the floor. "Oi," the woman muttered, her face a few inches away from the blonde's earth to yellow hair. Waving her hand in front of the phoenix's face with a small smirk, the blonde sighed once more, taking her hand away from his face. "Are you going to answer him?" Marco stated, gesturing towards the rubber teen. "Because you better have a good reason for interrupting our fight like that." Not taking the hint of threat at all to heart, the woman placed a finger on her lips, her eyes teasingly searching the room for an answer. She hummed, causing for the rubber teen to question once more. "What? Ah." Pointing her finger up in the air with yet another smirk, the girl chuckled, sitting down on a nearby boulder with a small innocent smile. "That's it." Swinging her legs in the air, the girl nodded, before holding out her hand. "My name's Koala. It's a pleasure to meet you." Tilting her head slightly to the side, Koala grinned, letting go of the sweets as they fell to the floor. Blinking, the teen nodded, taking a hold of the hand with a slightly confused smile. "My name's Luffy, I'm going." "Don't worry." Bursting out the words with excitement, Koala flung her hands to the back of her head, letting out a small whistle. "I already know your name, both in fact." "Whoa, really?" the teen stated over-enthusiastically back, his own head tilting. Letting out yet another sigh, the blonde leaned back onto the wall, his eyes glued to the weirdly excited girl. "It's not that surprising, after all. I doubt people kept quiet about us being here as soon as the fight broke out." "Oh," Luffy mumbled before placing a fist in his hand. "Well, it was nice to meet you, Koala." "See ya," turning around fully to face back towards the arena. The rubber teen obviously walked away from the blonde and the girl, causing Koala to appear in front of him almost instantly. "Bad idea," was all she stated, making the rubber teen to furrow his eyebrows. "And why would it be a bad idea?" the phoenix asked, rubbing his fingers between his temple. Tutting, Koala walked back towards the blonde, a small smirk once again crawling onto her lips. "Didn't you know, Yellow Hair? The Marines are coming to town, and word's going round that they're bringing thousands of their men." Ignoring the sudden seriousness that echoed in the conversation, Koala continued on, looking past Marco's widened eyes. "In fact, you should consider yourself lucky that we interrupted you. If not, this place would be crawling with Marines within minutes." And, glancing briefly towards the rubber teen with a saddened look, Koala sighed, stretching out her arms with a yawn. "We wouldn't want that now, would we? Two crews like yours in one place? It'd a field day for the Marines if they caught you both." "And why would you care?" Marco uttered out, successfully catching the attention of the girl. Instantly sending the blonde a grin, the girl wrapped her arm around the rubber teen's neck, ruffling his hair with a giggle. "Because you see, my partner has a small connection to both of you. I think he'd be heartbroken if anything happened to both of you. Especially this one." Poking her finger out to the straw-hatted teen beside her, Koala giggled once more, before letting go of Luffy and flinging her hands behind her back. Stumbling forward, Luffy shook his head, before blinking a few times. "Huh? Me?" the rubber teen mumbled out, confusion uttering his eyes. "Yep, you." The girl stated again, but didn't press on any further. Clapping her hands together, Koala pointed both pirates towards a small door which looked familiar to the phoenix. Now that's the best way. You have much choice in the matter. You're going whether you want to or not. Furrowing his eyebrows, Marco glued his sight towards the door which had previously drew his attention, though slowly sighed at the girl's attitude. Skipping over to where the door was placed, Koala hummed, opening the door without ease before glancing back towards Marco and Luffy. "Well," she started, tilting her head to the side with an innocent smile, "shall we go?" It had seemed like forever before anything remotely interesting happened in the Golden Room, Ace barely keeping awake and the voice not straying far from his side. Suddenly, a crash erupted from above, causing the ex-commander to stumble forward from his spot on the wall and frantically look around. The hell was that? Looking towards the voice for answers, a small scowl formed on the fire thrower's lips as he saw the voice shrug, its eyes as frantic as his. Seemingly answering their questions was a figure appearing in the one doorway at the back of the room, its own body covered in a cloak similar to Ace's. Breathing heavily, the figure slowly walked over to the center of the room, its eyes narrowing at the sight of Ace. Instantly getting into a stance, the mystery figure glared, its voice rough yet slightly familiar. "It appears," he started, his fingers clenching together under his gloves, "that you aren't the lovely Haruta I was waiting for." Scowling, Ace inwardly gagged, his own eyes glaring into the souls of the others. Seeing his eyes landing on the piece of paper he still had in hand, the figure twitched. "Where did you get that?" Straightening his back to form a stance himself, Ace folded the paper away, his glare not faltering in the slightest. "Who the fuck are you?" Ace asked bluntly, his eyes narrowing. "I'm afraid I can't tell you that, but you see, the young lady I gave that to, she's supposed to be here. And to find that you're here instead," the edging halt in his words gave the fire thrower a good idea on what he was about to say, to which Ace simply laughed. "Then I don't care." Silence echoed after his words, the figure seemingly overthrowing the question in his own mind. Finally breaking the silence, the figure chuckled, pulling off one of his gloves with a completely different demeanor. "I haven't got the time to mess around down here, so if you could quickly tell me where Miss Haruta is, that would be great." Hinting the last words with a threat, the figure stepped forward once more towards Ace. Splitting out a grin, Ace nodded, before stating with amusement, "Afraid I can't do that, weirdo. See, I could be just handing her over to a creepy pervert, or even a marine. And I don't know which is worse, to be honest." Ignoring Ace's words, the voice stuttered, its eyes fixated on the cloaked man. "It can't be." Twitching at Ace's words, the figure instantly threw a punch in the ex-commander's direction, crashing into the wall behind as he glared at the ducking Ace. "Very well then, it looks like I'll just have to force it out of you." Sabo was surprised to say the least. He never in a million years would have thought that Koala would have ever agreed to follow such an absurd plan, let alone go through with it. But here they both were, or more like here he was. Letting out a deep sigh, the blonde wiped his forehead, his train of thought jumbled by seeing his brother fighting out in the arena below. Swallowing down what he pretended to be most of his doubts, the blonde glanced over to his colleague, earning a small frown on his lips as he saw her face. "Whatever is the matter, Sabo?" she asked with a tint of amusement, digging into the bag of sweets with what seemed like no worries. "Perhaps you've realized that maybe your plan might not go down so well as you thought it would. After all, it seems to me that your brother could handle himself quite well, seeing how well he is holding himself up against that white-beard captain over there." Twitching at her words, Sabo childishly turned away from Koala, earning yet another laugh from the bob-hatted girl. Splitting out a smirk from her lips, Koala giggled, swinging herself around to face her colleague. "Oh, I've got it spot on then?" "You haven't." The blonde responded hastily, closing his eyes as he heard the sides of the arena break down from the fight. "We're still going through with it as we planned." "Well, if you're going to do it at any time, now would be the best," she mumbled back, her eyes rolling over to see the slightly scratched straw-hatted teen. "After all, it doesn't look like this fight will be going on much longer." Narrowing his eyebrows at her words, Sabo hesitantly turned around to face towards the arena, his eyes widening at the sight. Luffy was going to lose. From his view, it was fairly obvious from the start that the younger wouldn't stand that much of a chance of winning, but being the thick-skinned revolutionary he was, he refused to believe it. Chucking all his previous concerns away, the blonde looked directly into Koala's eyes. "Damn it," he muttered angrily, leaping up from his seat as the bob-hatted girl chuckled once more. "So, I'll take that as a yes. The plan is still going ahead?" Koala questioned closely into Sabo's ear, her voice tinted with amusement. Looking down directly into the other's eyes, Sabo hesitantly nodded, his eyes narrowing. Standing up from the seat, Koala smirked, chucking up her hand with a small wave. "Well then, see you on the other side, Sabo. If I die, it's all your fault." Comforting Sabo with those last words, Koala disappeared from his side, seemingly reappearing in the midst of the contest below. Not bothering to stay any longer to check, the blonde whipped up his cloak, hiding most of his features behind the shadows. As if on cue, the Colosseum exploded with screams of surprise and fear as countless onlookers pointed to the center of the arena. "The hell?" Not bothering to glance towards the onlookers' scream, Sabo stepped forward, ignoring the commotion the explosion in the midst of the arena had caused. Dodging the scurrying toys and people, the blonde glanced towards the path leading its way into the entrance of the tunnels, to which he will hopefully find Haruta. Finally spotting the door, Sabo halted, letting out a deep breath. The Marines would surely be alerted by the unexpected events at the Colosseum, so the blonde knew he didn't have much time to grab both Luffy and Haruta's crews and escape as safely as they could. It was a challenge, but one that he didn't have any other choice to accept. Pushing the door open hesitantly, Sabo was instantly met with light, something that was unexpected to be found at the start of a tunnel. Wincing, the blonde took a step forward, accidentally stumbling backwards onto the door, causing for it to slam with a crash. Blinking, Sabo grumbled, wiping the dust off his face as he straightened his back. Readjusting his gloves, the blonde took in his surroundings once more, before being stopped by a figure in the distance. Calling out to the figure with slight relief, Sabo slowly walked up to it, letting out a small smile. "Haru." Almost instantly as he had started, the revolutionary halted, his eyes narrowing and stance hardening. As the dust parted from the air, Sabo's vision became clearer, showing him that he figure before him didn't belong to woman in the slightest, let alone Haruta. "It appears," he started, his fists clenching, "that you are not the lovely Haruta I was waiting for." The man continued to be silent, his eyes glaring at the blonde's with annoyance. Frowning, the blonde's eyes darted to what the man had in his hand, which to his shock, was the small piece of paper he had previously handed Haruta. "Where did you get that?" he asked with caution, his mind focused on where the girl commander now was. Blinking, the man tilted his head slightly before tucking the said piece of paper away. Gritting his teeth, he took a small step back, uttering out a small question between his lips. "And who the fuck are you?" Seeing he wasn't going to get any straight answer out of the figure, Sabo sighed, bringing his hand up to his forehead with a wince. "I'm afraid I can't tell you that." Deciding to respond with a half-bothered answer, the blonde smirked slightly. The man wanted to be cryptic? Well, two could play that game. "But you see, the young lady I gave that to," Sabo quickly gestured towards the pocket the paper was placed in. "She's supposed to be here." Unexpectedly, the man just laughed, causing the revolutionary to raise an eyebrow. "I don't care about that," he uttered out, straightening his back with a mirrored smirk. "What I want to know is who the hell you are." Twitching, a small frown stretched across the blonde's lips, his eyes assessing the figure curiously. The man he was familiar. Sabo couldn't quite put his finger on where he had seen him before, but he definitely knew this wasn't the first time they had talked. It wasn't that surprising to the revolutionary that he'd met such an annoying character before, seeing as he dealt with them day to day. But something about this person, it gave a twisting feeling in his gut. Shaking away those thoughts for the meantime, the blonde stretched out the fabric of his gloves, pulling them off swiftly as he threw them onto the ground with a grumble. "I haven't got time to mess around, mister, so if you could quickly tell me where Miss Haruta might be, that would be great." Irritably, the figure just laughed again, his smirk showing through the shadows of the cloak. "Afraid I can't do that, weirdo." Sabo narrowed his eyebrows, not liking the cockiness of the man's attitude. He was definitely familiar, there was no doubt about it. And the fact that Sabo couldn't think of where he'd seen him before irritated him more than the man's actual words. See? The figure gestured his hands out, his voice tinted in amusement. Maybe it had been in the past, but that couldn't have been it. After all, the only people he'd had known in the past had been Luffy and A. I could just be handing her over to a creepy pervert, or even a marine. He could just ask him, though the thought of not figuring it out by himself was insulting to the blonde. Maybe he had previously worked in the revolutionaries? Though wouldn't that mean that the man would recognize him as well? And I don't know which one is worst, to be honest. Damn it. Hearing the man finish his words, Sabo twitched, his arm unconsciously making its way towards the figure's head, colliding with the wall behind him almost instantly. It looks like I'll just have to force it out of you. The blonde muttered to himself almost too loudly, causing the man to stare widely at the revolutionary. Sure, the man might not have been Haruta, God knows where she is. But Sabo was sure of one thing. He was going to find out who the hell this man was. Luffy was, as some put it, confused to say the least. Hearing such a statement referring to the rubber captain wasn't uncommon, due to the fact he lacked in common sense. Though in this situation, it wouldn't aim beside the whitebeard captain he was previously fighting. Luffy pouted, stretching out his arms with a groan. Is this going to take much longer? Staying silent, the mysterious bob-hatted girl continued to lead the way through the tunnel, causing for the rubber team to complain once more. Where are you taking us? Still, the girl said nothing. Earning a small frown of his own, the blonde captain narrowed his eyes, cautiously taking steps in the girl's direction. You do realize that if the Marines are actually coming to this island, that I'm not going to just leave without my crew. Seemingly not thinking this through himself, Luffy uttered a small gasp, his eyes widening in what could be a combination of surprise and fury. What? Hey, you, is Pineapple. My name is Marco. Mar Company, right? Are you taking us off the island without our crews? Luffy finished, running up to the girl's side. Humming, the bob-hatted girl smiled, like she was enjoying the two captains' curiosity in where they were going. But she continued to stay silent. Letting out a small huff, Marco glanced to the side, before his eyes scrolled over towards the straw-hatted boy. You might as well give up, it doesn't look she's going to say anything useful to us anytime soon. Glancing back at the blonde captain, Luffy pouted, slowing down his steps to be by the side of Marco once more. Then why are we following her? He muttered out childishly, causing the whitebeard captain to raise an eyebrow. It does seem pretty daring of you to interrupt our fight like that. Marco whispered to himself, though his words were heard by the others. As I said, Koala started, making the two captains go silent and listen to her words intensely. It wasn't me who thought up interrupting your little fight, chuckling softly. The bob-hatted girl turned to face both Marco and Luffy, her feet still skipping forwards. It was your companion? Marco finished off for her, his eyes narrowing slightly. That isn't going to cut it. You had to give us more information than that. Halting in his steps, the blonde captain put his hand directly onto his hip, his eyes glued to the bob-hatted girl. Seeing the other stop, Luffy quickly followed, crossing his arms over his chest, his pout still visible on his lips. I'm not going anywhere I don't want to, he stated, his eyebrows narrowing. Seeing this, Koala slowly stopped, letting out a small sigh. Mirroring the whitebeard captain's actions, the brunette placed her hands on her hips, her head tilting to the side. Her face grew a tired look, as she closed her eyes with a huff. He had to give me the job of handling you too, didn't he? Taking a few steps closer to the two halted captains, Koala unexpectedly sat down on the ground, crossing her legs over with another sigh. Well, fine. Let's have it your way. Blinking, Luffy stared down at the girl with confusion, before parting his lips to ask a question. Quickly interrupting anything the rubber teen had to say, the brunette spoke up once more, her voice easily recognized as being irritated. Let's just sit here and stare at each other in this damp, dark tunnel whilst Marines take over this island and most possibly, attack your crews. What? Marco started, his features completely changed from what they were before. But once again, before any of the captains had a thing to say, Koala had started to talk, silencing the blonde from speaking. Or, you could just quietly follow the person who might possibly have just saved your asses from being whipped by both Marines and Doflamingo's men and leave this island as safely as possible. Clicking her fingers, Koala pointed bluntly to both captains, her mouth still drawn in a frown. "You'll be happy, I'll be happy. The Marines? Not so much. But doesn't it seem better than just constantly questioning what I am doing?" Tilting his head, Luffy stared blankly at the girl. "Doflamingos, men?" he whispered to himself, before his eyes widened considerably. "I completely forgotten about him," he screamed aloud, causing for the blonde captain to rethink the situation he was in. "Yes, we realized that," Koala muttered out, her head now leaning on her palm. "And that's why you have to trust me on this. So what did Ya say? Do you want to continue sitting here, or do you actually want to escape this thing in one piece?" "But my crew," Luffy started, his arms gesturing outwards. "They're still all around the island. I'd completely forgotten about it." "Yes. I registered that. Now can we please move on so we can actually gather your crew?" Koala had stated with some annoyance, before her eyes scrolled over to Marcos. "Any more complaints or questions?" Narrowing his eyes, Marco let out a small sigh, before shaking his head slightly. "Let's just get this over and done with. Though I can't believe I'm putting my trust in some stranger." Splitting out a smirk, Koala leapt from the ground, clapping her hands together with a small laugh. "That just saved you." Turning her back to the two captains, the brunette skipped forward cheerfully. "That was easier than I had expected," she mumbled to herself, her smirk widening as she heard both Luffy and Marco follow her. "Hey," the Straw Hat teen mumbled out, his head tilted back in wonder. "Where are we?" Or maybe she had just spoken too soon. Zoro winced, his sight almost instantly blurred by the explosion of dust which overtook the arena. He mumbled out, causing him to cough out the debris which had floated into his mouth. Hell was that? Standing up from the seat, Robin scanned the area, her eyes darting everywhere. It wasn't Captain San, that's for sure. Her voice tinted in worry. The dark-haired woman glanced down to the swordsman, her hand settling on his shoulder. "We need to go." "What's up with all this dust?" the clown shouted out beside the two Straw Hat pirates, his arms flailing everywhere. "Why?" Zoro asked almost instantly, his eyebrows furrowed towards Robin. Her fists clenching slightly, the dark-haired woman frowned, her eyes darted over to the arena once more. "Luffy. He's not there anymore," she whispered out, causing for the green-haired swordsman to jump from his seat. "What?" he shouted out, his voice a little louder than needed. Leaning forward towards the row of seats in front of him, Zoro stared intensely at the arena before him, waiting for the dust to part and make his sight clearer. To his shock, the previously active arena before him was bare, no sign of either Luffy or the Whitebeard captain anywhere. His eye widening almost instantaneously, Zoro gripped the seat harshly, before looking back to Robin. "Damn it! Luffy!" he once again shouted out before the crowds, causing strange looks to penetrate towards the trio. Previously ignoring the discussion of the disappearance of the Straw Hat captain, Buggy exaggeratedly spat out the dust from his mouth, before glancing to where the other two pirates were staring out. "Eh?" he whispered out, blinking once more. "Eh?" joining the others in standing up, the clown screamed out, his hand pointing towards the center of the arena. "Where's Straw Hat gone?" Seeing as this brought more attention towards them, Robin twitched, grabbing the clown's shoulder harshly and dragging him down, out of the sight of the onlookers. "Hey, isn't that what are they doing here? It's the Straw Hat pirates, and Buggy the clown? Isn't he a Shichibukai?" Realizing that the trio were being recognized, Zoro slowly gulped, before glancing towards Robin. "You're right. We need to get out of here, quickly." Hearing a high-pitched scream echo from the crowd, the two Straw Hat pirates took it as this was a good time to run. Grabbing Buggy in tow, Robin and Zoro dodged through the shocked onlookers as they searched for places to escape. "Where the hell did Luffy go?" Zoro whispered frustratedly to himself, his eyes searching the Colosseum for some kind of exit. "I wouldn't worry about Straw Hat right now," Buggy squeaked out, patting the swordsman asleep. Twitching at the touch, Zoro instantly looked over his shoulder, his eye once again widening as his steps came to a halt. Hearing the sounds of her companions stopping, Robin parted her lips to speak, before her eyes fell onto what the other two were seeing. Her words faltering, the dark-haired woman stared towards the other side of the arena, her heartbeat quickening almost instantly. Standing at the edge of the Colosseum was an immense figure, one that was recognizable to any citizen living in the Grand Line. The Marines were here, and by the look of what the trio were seeing, there were thousands. Swallowing, the navigator glanced briefly towards the green-haired swordsman, almost fearful of the shock on his face as well. Well, Robin wasn't wrong at least. Things were sure to become interesting, though not in the way she'd wanted. Ace hadn't expected for the figure to attack him so unexpectedly, let alone being so committed to beat some kind of information out of him. Taking one glance at the man, he had quickly realized that the figure's voice belonged to a man. It was obvious that he was pissed at the fire thrower. Hints of that had been showed when the man had tried to flip him harshly into the ground, or when he had connected his fist directly into the ex-commander's face. Ace had supposed he'd pissed the figure off, though didn't understand what he did to this extent. Dodging yet another one of the figure's attacks towards his head, the fire thrower twitched, flinging himself over to the opposite side of the room. Shit, he muttered to himself, trying to straighten his way back into his stance. Wheezing out a cough, the fire thrower stared directly towards the blonde, his fists clenching in annoyance. Those moves, he'd seen them before. Narrowing his eyes, Ace stumbled forward, his back swaying slightly from the previous hit. A long time ago. Wincing at the sudden pain in his shoulder, the ex-commander darted quickly to the left, his eyes widening as he saw the wall beside him completely shattered. His eyebrows furrowing, Ace yelled out to the figure as he clutched his shoulder tightly. "Wait, where have I seen you before?" Before he could finish off his sentence, another fist appeared before him, causing the fire thrower to gulp and duck instantly. Taking the only chance he had had so far to hit the man, Ace swerved out his leg below, immediately making contact with the figure's ankles. Not expecting this, the figure yelped, stumbling towards the ex-commander with his arms stretched out. Placing his palm on the floor, the man quickly regained himself, lifting himself instantly off the ground and his feet directly into the air. Seeing this, Ace ducked once more to the side, watching as the figure's leg darted fiercely into the ground. "And that makes it a draw," the small straw-hatted boy shouted out in amazement, watching with joy at the previously battling boys as they tirelessly collapsed onto the floor. His eyes glazing over, Ace glanced down, suddenly ignoring the next attack the man was firing. "But that was impossible. You've improved." A kid similar to the age of Ace sputtered out, his breaths drawn and heavy. "Seriously. I can just about keep up with you." Dressed in the unique blue coat and black top hat that Ace had come to get used to, the kid laughed cheerfully, throwing his hands up in the air with a sigh. "It's times like these which I wish lasted forever," he whispered out, forming a toothy grin across his lips. There was only one person who he'd seen fight in such a similar way that Ace had used, one person that couldn't possibly be here no more. Closing his eyes, the ex-commander shook his head, his eyes re-falling onto the attacking figure a few steps away from him. How could he possibly be thinking of him now, even after all the years he'd spent trying to live up to his departed brother's wish? It seemed like Ace had still wanted to somehow believe that he was fine, living his life out on the seas as free as he could be, just like he had said. Trying his best to throw away those thoughts for the time being, the fire thrower leapt up from where he had stumbled, regaining his stance as the figure ran up to him. The man had wanted a fight, and Ace was happy to return that call, despite the unwanted recollections it had just brought him. Deciding that activating his devil fruit might not be the cleverest idea, the ex-commander settled in using his bare fists, similar to what the man before him was using. Flinging his hand back, Ace clenched down harshly into his palm, directing it towards the center of the figure's chest. "It really is him." A familiar voice echoed around the room, instantly distracting the fire thrower from his attack. Twitching at the sound of its voice, Ace darted his eyes towards the voice's figure, his eyes narrowing dangerously. But that's impossible." The voice stuttered, causing the ex-commander to instantly lose his glare, it being quickly replaced by widened eyes. The voice was staring, almost stunned at the sight of the man beside him, its mouth wide open as countless mumbles fell out. Raising an eyebrow, Ace was about to ask what the voice so shocked about, before a familiar fist interrupted and threw him to the center of the golden room. "Damn it!" the man had yelled out in frustration, quickly making his way over to where Ace had been thrown. The fire thrower winced in pain once more, coughing out a mixture of debris and blood from his mouth as he stared up at the oncoming figure, his fist clenching ever so slightly. "I don't know why you want Haruta this badly," Ace slowly mumbled out, leaning up against the circular wall placed in the center of the room. "But if you seriously think I'm going to tell you, you're highly mistaken. Highly." "Huh?" the figure responded, its voice almost surprised at the statement. "Isn't that what this is all about?" Ace bellowed out, twitching as the pain from his shoulder returned. The man suddenly went silent, seemingly thinking over what the fire thrower had just said, leaving Ace to stare blankly at the man with confusion. Then, out of the blue, the figure leaned down to the height Ace was propped at, the features of his face showing slightly through the shadows. "Who are you?" Blinking, Ace pondered the question for a moment, re-asking it in his head. "What?" The man said nothing, his stare still gazing harshly into Ace's eyes, seemingly trying to get a glance of what the fire thrower looked like. Noticing the awkwardness of the situation Ace had now found himself in, he quickly cleared his chest, before narrowing his eyes directly into the man's, almost mirroring his stare. "I could ask you the same question as well," he asked with his voice tinted in caution, "because no matter how much you stare at me, I'm not revealing anything." It had seemed that for a few moments, the man hadn't heard him, for he continued to stare into brims of Ace's cloak. But finally, the man let out an exhausted sigh, moving back slightly as he stood up once more. "Very well," he stated, moving his hand up towards the hood of his own cloak. "I guess it would be rude not to introduce myself first." Grasping the fabric with hesitance, the figure drew back the hood, the features in his face almost instantly becoming clearer as it hit the light. "The name is Sabo, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Sabo." Hearing the single word leaving the stranger's mouth, Ace froze. His pupils edgily started to make their way towards where the figure's head was shadowed, his breathing becoming quicker within seconds. No, the name is Sabo. It couldn't, and it's a pleasure to meet you." "It can't be." Repeating that single name in his head, Ace stared intensely at the cloaked figure. His lips parting slightly, the ex-commander unconsciously squirmed closer to the wall behind him, somehow alerting the figure. Sabo mumbled, his eyebrow raising curiously. Swallowing harshly, Ace let out a small, weak chuckle, his pupils shaking with confusion. What?" the fire thrower whispered out, his words shaken. Sabo. That name. It was a name that he'd been repeating inside his mind ever since he was a kid. But that person had died. He knew he had recognized the man from before somewhere, but this wasn't possible. Then again, him being alive shouldn't be possible either. Sabo? Ace re-questioned, his eyes pleadingly looking at the figure for some explanation or proof that he was the brother he had lost long ago. "So you do recognize my name then?" Sabo responded, his arms crossing over proudly. Furrowing his eyebrows, the man narrowed his eyes, his head tilting slightly to the side. Oi," he started, his hand reaching out to Ace. "Are you okay?" He wasn't. That was a fact. Swallowing harshly on any failing attempt of a comeback he could think of, Ace took a deep breath. There was only 3 possibilities. 1. The stranger also happened to have the same name as his deceased brother who he also happened to think of whilst they were fighting. 2. The stranger purposely said that name to piss the fire thrower off. Or 3. Stumbling up from where he was previously sitting, the ex-commander looked down, keeping his features hidden from the other. Glancing briefly at the surprised look on the stranger's face, Ace twitched, before stuttering out a quiet reply. "Your cloak," he started, causing for the figure to raise an eyebrow. "Put the hood down." "Huh?" the stranger questioned, not expecting such a blunt request. "Why would you want me to do duh?" Just do it," Ace shouted out hastily, his eyes glued to where the stranger's face was shadowed. He had to see his face again, he needed to. He wanted to believe that it was his brother staring obliviously back at him, but then again. Was it even possible for him to be alive? Dagra has said he'd clearly seen Sabo's death, though hundreds had seen his own as well. Clenching his fists, Ace swallowed once more, his eyes unfazing from his thoughts. It was easily visible that the figure was confused, his body shifting slightly back, but to Ace's relief, the stranger sighed, noticeably shaking his head as he reached up to the tip of the cloak. "I must say, If my colleague saw me doing this, she'd probably kill me. He huffed out, causing Ace to twitch at the remark. But for you, tensing on the name, the man started to pull back slowly on the cloak. I will make an exception. Watching as the stranger pulled the cloth down to his neck, Ace tensed, before stumbling back. Taking in each feature within a second, the fire thrower let out a small gasp, his hands and pupils shaking almost instantly with disbelief. The man was in his 20s at least, showing signs that he was around the same age as Ace. His hair was the pale blonde color to which the fire thrower recognized instantly, its style similar to his own. Glancing up briefly gave Ace two owlish eyes which were staring back at his, almost exactly like Luffy's. Hanging visibly around his neck was a pair of old worn-out goggles, showing signs of age and use. And lastly, adding most shockingly, was the drawn-out scar etched into the left of the man's face, covering over one eye. Allowing for his mouth to drop open, Ace stuttered, his eyes completely widened. It was him. It was actually Sabo. It couldn't be, he could just be another vision he was seeing, but... No, this seemed different, it felt too real. The man in front of him was close to his age, not the young Sabo he knew all those years ago. Sabo, his brother. The one he thought he lost 10 years ago. He was alive this whole time? Letting his eyes shadow over, the fire thrower clenched his fist, his arms tensing up. After all these years, Ace barely whispered out, though his words were full and more serious than before. After all these years, you were alive. Sabo stepped back slightly, his eyes narrowed, showing apprehension towards Ace. What? He questioned, his tone deepening slightly as well. Keeping quiet, Ace took a step forward, raising his hand up edgily. But before Sabo had any time to react, the fire thrower had striked his fist into the blonde's face harshly, sending the revolutionary backwards and crashing into the opposite wall. Haruto was frantic. Before her and Vista's eyes, Ace had disappeared into a piled mountain of debris, leaving nothing but shuddering echo behind. Without saying a word, the Whitebeard commander raced over to where the wall had collapsed, Vista quickly following her behind. Banging her fists onto the nearest blunt object with determination, the brunette let out a shout, her voice almost timid. Ace? Ace? Hearing no response, Haruto punched the rock once more, her teeth gritting. Damn it, you idiot! Turning back to her companion, Haruto's eyes widened with fury, her lower lip wobbling. Why didn't you stop him? Blinking, the top-hatted commander stared at Haruto with confusion, before tilting his head slightly. Stop him? From doing something stupid like that? Her words becoming breathless, Haruto knelt to the ground. Placing a hand on her forehead, the Whitebeard commander closed her eyes, letting a small sigh part from her lips. We just got him back. Seeing the pirate's distress, Vista made his way beside Haruto, his briefly looking at the wreckage. He'll be fine, he said with slight apprehension, which was quickly recognized by the brunette. Fine. You saw it, Vista. The whole wall just freaking collapsed on him. And who knows what injuries he has from. Her words cutting off almost instantly. Haruto shook her head, her eyes glazing over for a split second. That day. And what do we even say to Marco and the others about this? Interrupting her words, Vista grabbed the brunette roughly, his eyebrows furrowed. Believe me, even if all the wall collapsed on him or he had injuries from back then, I'm sure he's fine. Raising an eyebrow, Haruto tilted her head sliding to the side, her eyes narrowing for a second. What makes you so sure of that? Shuffling to the side, the top-hatted commander took his hand gently off the brunette's shoulder before staring her straight in the eye. When I first found Ace, he wasn't just standing around. I watched him fall off the Colosseum, Haruto. He fell head first onto the ground without any help, and he walked away from it, no medical attention needed. Her eyes widening in the slightest bit of disbelief, the Whitebeard commander swallowed, her voice questioning. He fell? Went flat out unconscious as soon as he hit Earth. Believe me, when I walked over to see what the commotion was all about, I wasn't expecting to see the face of the victim to be his. Vista said with some humor in his voice as he crossed his arms. Furrowing her eyebrows, Haruto closed her eyes once more, before placing her hands on her hips. That still doesn't change the fact he still might be stuck in that, gesturing towards the rubble, the brunette peeked, one eye open, wreckage. Leaning to the side slightly to take in the depth of the wreckage, Vista's eyes widened, before looking back to Haruta blankly. You don't expect just us to go through it, do you? That's impossible. Well, what else can we do? Throwing her hands in the air, Haruta turned and walked swiftly towards the wreckage, taking a hold of one of the boulders. Go back to the ship and say, oh guys. We found Ace alive, yes that Ace, but he AED by hundreds of 50-ton boulders all at once, so there's a high chance he's not alive anymore. Can you help us find his remains? Yeah. That will go down smoothly. Sending the top-hatted commander a pissed-off look, the swordswoman tried to move the boulder slightly, though her efforts visibly failed. Watching the girl desperately trying to move the rock, Vista sighed, walking over to her with a toned-down voice. It's not going to work. And who said about looking for his remains? Ignoring the last part of his comment, Haruta glared once more at the swordsman before trying to push the boulder aside once more. Are you going to help me or what? Glancing to the side, Vista nodded, his eyes visibly faded from thoughts. Shaking them away, the swordsman held his hands out towards the boulder, gathering all his strength to push it by slightly. Grunting, Vista twitched, not realizing the weight of the rubble which had finally stopped falling. Trying once more, though he knew it would do no good, the top-hatted commander breathed out heavily, stepping back to glance at Haruta. As I said, it's not going to work. Huffing, the brunette turned away from her companion, brushing her palms off with a glum pout. We'll just have to get the others then. Who knows how we'll persuade them, she muttered, her voice echoing in the space they were in. It was then that an important fact occurred to the duo, causing for the swordsman to stutter. Haruta? What? The commander replied almost instantly, her arms crossed over. Glancing up, the top-hatted pirate pointed towards the ceiling, his face completely blank. How do we get out of here? They left. Blinking, Usopp let out a small noise from his lips, his head tilting in confusion. The small dwarf nodded in return, his arms crossed over his chest proudly as he relayed the information to the long-nosed pirate. Yes. I saw them leave myself. The kind threatening woman and the moody swordsman left with a clown soon after they arrived. Hearing the words leave the small dwarf's lips, Usopp stared blankly at the little man. Jumping up from where he was sitting, the sharpshooter turned to look everywhere, searching for the sight of Zoro or Robin. He started, his hands falling over his ears. They left without me, he cried out, his mouth falling open in shock. That's right, mister. They left almost an hour ago. The dwarf pointed out bluntly, causing for Usopp to cry out in shock again. How did I miss them? They were right there. Pointing towards the now empty spot in which the swordsman was previously sitting, the long-nosed pirate deflated, hitting the floor with a moan. And what's with taking the clown and not me? Do they not realize how much of a benefit I will bring if they brought me along? Mumbling to himself on the grass, Usopp flattened out, before his head peeked up from the ground. Wait, did you say they went with a clown? That's correct? Narrowing his eyes in thought, Usopp found himself tilting his head to the side once more, his eyes scrolling up in confusion. Robin and Zoro, the dwarf nodded. Were with the clown? Twitching at the dwarf's positivity, Usopp jumped up from the ground, picking up the tiny dwarf with him. Hey, you can't pick us up like duh. Show me which way they went. Usopp interrupted, his voice tinted with seriousness unlike before. Blinking, the dwarf stopped squirming in his arms, tilting its head slightly before pointing towards a shadowed tunnel confusedly. They went that way. But why would you want to go with them? They sounded like they were going towards danger. Twitch. Don't you worry, the long-nosed pirate exclaimed, laughing as he took a step towards the tunnel. Pointing a thumb towards himself, Usopp winked at the young dwarf, a fake and confident voice leaving his lips. I'll be sure to make Zoro commit to protecting us if any danger comes our way. Letting out an overconfident laugh, the sharpshooter started to run down the tunnel, the dwarf staring at him in awe. Whoa! That's so brave of you, mister. I know. Usopp nodded in return, his lips parting into a smile. Though, narrowing his eyebrows, the long-nosed pirate halted in his steps slowly, speaking out his thoughts in the echoing tunnel. I wonder what made them leave so suddenly. Lifting up his hand, the dwarf waved excitedly in the air, now ignoring the fact he was stuck in the sharpshooter's fingers. Ooh, I know. Maybe they were going off to fight some evil dragon and needed you to step in and slay it. Twitch. Don't say stuff like that, Usopp shouted out, his knees shaking as he started to run once more. It could even be coming after us right now, the dwarf exclaimed a little too excitedly, its eyes slowly turning into stars. Twitch. Before Usopp could get another word in, a booming sound echoed loudly before them, the source coming from further inside the tunnel. Yelping, the long-nosed pirate shuddered, halting in his steps entirely as he stumbled back, his words stuttering. What was that? The dragon, instantly looking towards the dwarf, Usopp stared blankly for a second, before registering what the little man had said. Letting out a small scream, the long-nosed pirate took another step back, before shaking his head fiercely. Zoro and Robin wouldn't need a clown to fight a dragon. Zoro and Robin wouldn't need a clown to fight a dragon. There is no dragon. And no dragon in the tunnels. Nope. Repeating these words, Usopp edgily started to make his way further down the tunnel once more, his body shaking entirely. Wait, why would Zoro and Robin need a clown in the first place? Maybe to sacrifice it to the dragon. Twitch. Watching as the stones fell slowly from the now crumbled wall, Ace twitched, his eyes widening as he glanced down at his hands. Wah! He mumbled out, realizing what he had just done. He deserved it. The voice seemed to justify, though Ace took no note to it. He had just punched Sabo. Sabo, running almost instantly over to where he'd thrown his brother, Ace staggered, watching as a pissed-off revolutionary appeared from the wreckage, his eyes glaring. The blonde had been polite to the man, and what had he gotten in return? A punch. Right in the face. Brushing off the debris with his gloves, the revolutionary ruffled his hair before speaking in a slightly confused and dangerous tone. What the hell was that for? He asked, his use of language changing from his normal polite standards. The man started, his words failing him. Narrowing his eyes, Sabo seemed to take charge of the conversation, his hands slowly trailing up to Ace's head. Very well. It's your turn, he stated, surprising the ex-commander from his mumbles. After all, I think it's only fair that I know your identity as well, seeing as we know each other somehow. Shifting slightly, the man stared at the blonde with surprise, before taking a step forward. Seeing this, the revolutionary wavered his hand over the staff strapped to his back, not taking his eyes off the fire thrower. But to his surprise, the man didn't go forward to punch him again. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He hugged him. Not just briefly or half-heartedly either, for the man gripped the blonde's back, harshly burrowing his face into the revolutionary's shoulder. Not knowing how to react to this, Sabo's eyes widened considerably, his eyebrows knotting together in confusion. Glancing down to the hooded man who was now shaking, on his shoulder, the blonde tilted his head, slightly shaking the man to get his attention. Oi! Sabo whispered surprisingly quietly, giving the man another nudge. Still clutching lightly onto the blonde's back, the man let out a mumble. Though Sabo heard the heaviness of the words. It's been so long. I didn't even think neither of us thought you'd still be alive. Catching his words multiple times, the man gritted his teeth. But here you are. Silence. Edgeman stopped speaking, Sabo still stuck in the man's embrace. He could have asked what the stranger had meant by neither of us. He could have even demanded that the man explain why he was even hugging him. But instead, he did something completely different. Shifting out of the spot where Sabo and the man had been standing, the revolutionary pushed the other back, swiftly grabbing a hold of the stranger's hood before he could react. Ignoring the man's yelp of surprise, Sabo yanked the hood back, allowing for his gaze to land on the face of the stranger. Taking in a sharp breath, the blonde let go of the cloth, his feet stumbling backwards almost instantly. With his pupils widened in under a second, Sabo opened his mouth to form words, though easily failed. Hey, Sabo! An out-of-breath voice called out to him, its tone slightly pissed off. Though instead of this making Sabo frown, it made him form a smile, a cheerful laugh following. You haven't lost me already, have you? He called back, clearly imagining the twitch the other would give off. As expected, the far-off voice huffed moodily, giving the blonde another reason to laugh. You were the one that got lost, idiot. I was following close behind. It was impossible. Sensing the other coming closer to him, Sabo hid behind the nearest tree, placing his hand over his mouth to stop his laughter giving him away. Sure, sure. He agreed, watching as the leaves near him started to ruffle. His face. This is stupid. The other mumbled, the blonde watching as he crossed his arms over one another. What kind of idiot keeps a hidden base in the middle of the forest like this anyway? Pulling a bored face, Sabo sighed. You have no right to say that you can't even find it. Shut up. The other retorted, balling his hands into fists. Stamping harshly onto the foliage on the floor, the other looked around everywhere, his eyes narrowing. Seeing this, the blonde grinned, getting pleasure out of seeing the other confused. PSSH. Letting out a small giggle. Sabo clasped his hands over his mouth once more, his body shaking as he tried to keep the laughter in. Where are you, Sabo? I know you're here, the other exclaimed irritably, his eyes scanning the area with gritted teeth. It was one he'd been wishing to see ever since he'd departed his hometown 12 years ago. What are you talking about, Ace? The blonde paused, letting out a deep breath. I'm right here. One that he completely yearned for after hearing the news of his death. Aha! Ace smirked sneakily, whipping out his staff as he threw it to where the blonde was hiding. Hearing the dull, bonk sound from his friend's head, the freckled boy crossed his arms proudly. I couldn't find anything, huh? He questioned with sarcasm, earning a pout from the blonde. Rubbing his head, Sabo sighed, lifting one arm up in defeat. You're no fun. Letting another small huff, Ace shook his head, before his eyes lightened up with amazement. No way. Huh? The blonde mumbled, turning around to look towards where the freckled boy's interest was caught. Seeing the interest, Sabo grinned. Picking up his feet once more, the toothy boy ran towards the area, his grin widening as he heard the other follow him. See, I told you. He yelled out, halting in his steps as stared eagerly at the sight. Stopping beside him, Ace let out a deep breath, nodding slightly to himself. This is it, Sabo. We'll start here. The blonde mumbled, his eyebrows raising. We'll make it out there one day. He started, his pupils become blurry with thought. Ace? Sabo questioned mostly to himself, his voice etched with disbelief. We will escape this island, escape this sea, the freckled boy yelled out, making the blonde step back in surprise. What? The blonde exclaimed, not expecting the sudden declaration. Become pirates, Sabo. Gripping his fingers together, Ace looked other to the blonde with commitment, his eyes seemingly heavy with thought. This is where it'll start. Letting a deep sigh escape from his lips, Sabo crossed his arms, giving Ace a curious look. And how will that happen exactly? If you hadn't noticed, setting out to sea now wouldn't be the cleverest of ideas, would it? Twitching, the freckled boy turned away from the blonde, his eyes narrowed. Then we'll save up. Until then, we'll gather everything we need to set sail. Wait, you're actually being serious? Sabo muttered in surprise, his eyes widened. Turning his face to meet Sabo's, Ace nodded, his fists clenching once more. Just you and me, Sabo. We'll make it out there, I know it. Staring into the boy's face for what seemed like an eternity, Sabo sighed for the 15th time that day. Well, haven't you changed your tune since last week? Ignoring the responding pissed-off huff, Sabo smiled, giving Ace an excited laugh. But you know what? I don't exactly mind that idea, Ace. Raising his eyebrows, the freckled boy seemed almost surprised by the quickness of agreement his friend gave him. Turning away to hide his small smile, Ace glanced towards the hidden base they'd finally found, earning another brief grin from the blonde. Hearing the other's voice, Ace looked up towards his brother, his lips parted with a genuine smile. It's been a while, Sabo. As a bullet passed millimeters away his ear, Zoro frowned, sending another attack towards the oncoming Marines. To say that the swordsman was surprised at the sheer numbers of Marines that came battling towards him would be an understatement. Not that he wasn't surprised they would be here, after all. The supernova that runs this island had just resigned. If that hadn't piqued the Marines' interest, he didn't know what would. Glancing towards Robin, Zoro narrowed his eyes in thought, easily dodging another bullet aimed for his head. Oi! He called out, his voice barely making its way through the battle to the archaeologist. Luckily catching his shout, Robin raised her eyebrows, her head instantly twisting to where the swordsman was standing. We can't stay here any longer, he stated, blocking 2 swords swiftly. Not if we want to find Luffy. Seemingly having the same thoughts, Robin nodded, silently agreeing with Zoro as she took in the surroundings. We seem to be surrounded, she said calmly, her arms crossing over into her attacking position. Yeah, I can see that. Turning around, the swordsman sighed, completely forgetting the screeching clown that had been accompanying them. Can you spot any exit anywhere? Narrowing her eyes, Robin ducked, clutching her fingers together as she heard the familiar click of the enemy's backs echoing above her. Raising back up, the archaeologist's eyes blinked, her head turning instantly towards Zoro. I'm sure I spotted a door in between those pillars over there when we first came here. I deemed them suspicious but… Letting her words fade away in thought, Robin shook her head. We don't have a choice now. Taking that as the best option they had, Zoro nodded, turning towards Buggy as he yelled out to him. Oi! We're going. Pointing towards Robin, Zoro followed after the archaeologist, the screaming clown following close behind. Hearing the commanding shouts of the Marines realizing their plan, Buggy twitched, his steps speeding up instantly as he tapped the swordsman on the shoulder. Guys. Did you think they'd just leave us alone? Feeling a headache coming on, Zoro scowled, inching away from the clown and letting out a small growl. Well, if you want to stay behind and fight them by yourself, you're welcome to. Twitching once more, Buggy shook his head ferociously, his grip slipping off Zoro's shoulder. You know what, I'll just follow you guys. Responding with a HPMH, Zoro looked ahead, finally spotting the door Robin was previously talking about. Saying that it was suspicious didn't even cover it. There was something about the door that instantly struck the swordsman as interesting, or more abruptly to put it, it was the aura around the door that silently told him to stay away. But it wasn't like he had any other choice. With the screaming Marines practically centimeters away from attacking them, the only way of finding their currently missing captain was to go through the door. Interrupting the swordsman's thoughts, a cry screamed out behind him, followed by a familiar clown appearing in 2 pieces. A sword placed in the middle of him. Noticing his distractions had slowed him down, Zoro pushed the 2-piece clown to the side, raising his sword to the Marine who was now standing inches away from him. Spotting this, Robin halted in her steps, instantly turning round, her eyes widening. They had multiplied. The amount of Marines before them had grew despite the earlier backfire. Even with Zoro by her side, it was hard to tell whether or not they would even make it to the door in time. Watching the Marine fall beside him, Zoro glanced back to Robin, his eyes silently telling her he was thinking the same thing. Yelling at the top of his voice, the swordsman kicked the recovering Buggy towards Robin, before facing the crowd of Marines. Go ahead, I'll catch you up. Are you Sue? Before the archaeologist had time to respond, Zoro spoke up again, slowly dragging both swords beside him. If you stay here we won't find Luffy, he stated sharply, not having time to explain his actions any further. Taking the hint, Robin nodded, helping up the complaining clown in front of her and running back towards the door. Even though the swordsman didn't vocally say he was worried, Robin knew he was. Even though it was common for their captain to vanish unexpectedly at times and reappear totally unfazed, with the way the fight was going earlier, the archaeologist knew something bad had or was about to happen. Clenching her fists, she continued on, ignoring the shouts and cries of the Marines behind her. Be careful, swordsman-san, she uttered out, before pushing the door gently open. Voices. There was definitely a lot of them, in the secluded little tunnel Usopp had found himself in. Some were happy, some were scared, and some were well. Some had got the long-nosed liar yelping in fright. But still, Usopp had continued on walking, despite how many times he'd wanted to turn around and run back. After all, his nakama was somewhere in here, for some unbeknown reason. It wasn't until the small gnome in his hand had spoke up, that he had realized he'd walked the length of the tunnel repeatedly, passing the same rockfall twice. Falling to the floor in despair, Usopp sighed, clinging to the jagged piece of wall like it was his lifeline. We're never going to get out of here, he whispered in a dramatic tone, his eyes scrolling over towards the gnomes. Robin and Zoro must have disappeared into thin air. You're giving up already? The gnome questioned back, hopping down from Usopp's shoulder with a oomph. But I thought you were the great Usopp Land. Seemingly getting all his energy back within a second, Usopp bounced up from the ground with a grin, placing both hands on his hips as he proclaimed proudly to the small gnome. Of course not. Lifting up one of his hands to point to himself, he chuckled. Usopp Land never gives up on anything, whether it be conquering islands or facing dragons. His voice shaking at the last part, the long-nosed liar sighed, slowly making his way over to a boulder, but still. Tilting his head to the side, the gnome's eyes furrowed. What is it? Sitting down onto the rock, Usopp narrowed his eyes, a thoughtful look crossing his face. It does worry me that I haven't heard from the others by now. After all, something must have happened for Zoro and Robin to leave so quickly. Mumbling, the liar found himself sighing again, holding one hand up to his chin. Shaking his head, Usopp looked back towards the gnome. Oh well, as long as the plan went right, I guess there's nothing to worry about. Not getting one bit of the human's words, the gnome nodded blankly, before stating loudly, but how does that help us now? Sweat dropping, the long-nosed pirate leaned back, ignoring the sudden cracks the wall behind him started to echo from his weight. It's kinda obvious that no one else is down here. His tone tinted with sulking, Usopp crossed his hands over his chest, looking sheepishly to the side. Crack. Then where did Zoro land and Robin land go? Crack. Twitching, Usopp flung his hands to his head in frustration. We've checked everywhere. Who knows where they are or even where the clown had taken them? Crack. You think the clown took them somewhere? The gnome questioned with a tint of curiosity, his head tilting even further. Crack. Well. Usopp started, his eyes narrowing once more as he dramatically took on the detective role. I can't think of any reason they would be with a clown in the first place. Believe me, if anyone was to have a clown with them it certainly wouldn't be Robin and Zoro. They're just not just that kind of people. Crack. Oh well. Flinging his arms down to the side, the long-nosed liar seemed to admit defeat, shutting his eyes as he leaned further back onto the caving-in wall. It's best not to question things like duh. Suddenly, interrupting his words drastically, the wall behind the pirate crashed down, leaving Usopp to fall back as rocks that had Preeti wall rained down on him. Briefly hearing the concerned shouts of the gnome, Usopp groaned, wincing his eyes open to gather what had happened. Wada? He mumbled out, rubbing his head as his vision blurred. Hell this? Different voices mixed up into his vision. A sudden shadow of a person looming over him. Zoro? He barely whispered out, the words leaving his mouth muffled. What say? Taking up the left side of his view, another person leaned over him, this time a much smaller figure. Oh oi, don't sleep. Shit injured, beyond his will, Usopp began to close his eyes, the pain in his head slowly going away. Yeah, asleep right now would definitely do him good, then, he'll be sure to find his crewmates. It's been a while, Sabo. Leaning back against the wall, Robin furrowed her eyebrows. So there was someone in here. Placing a hand firmly over Buggy's mouth, the archaeologist placed a finger on her mouth, silently telling the clown to stay quiet. Nodding in response, the clown backed away, also placing his ear on the wall to listen in. But make that two people, Robin thought, her fists clenching. She was sure she'd heard the second man's voice before somewhere. Where she'd heard it had escaped her. Though the name Sabo had certainly rung a bell, but there was no way the second man was called Sabo. Though the Sabo she knew would never sound so well, she couldn't put into words how the second man had sounded. I know, the first man had spoke again, his words fading. His eyes widening, Buggy leaned in closer to Robin. His words whispered in a surprised tone. Hey, that's... Before the clown had time to finish, Robin had placed her hand over his mouth again, shaking her head. They needed to be as quiet as possible. That is until she can figure out who the people behind the wall were. How are you even alive? I mean, even I saw. His words tumbling over themselves, the second man stuttered uncontrollably, an easily audible gulp being heard through the wall. I don't know, Sabo. So the second man is called Sabo. With her mouth curving downwards into a frown, Robin leaned in further, her eyes narrowing by the second. Does that mean you've been alive all this time? Sabo screamed out, Robin tensing from the aura the conversation was giving off. Though, Sabo didn't seem to be angry. No, it was something else entirely, There didn't seem to be a response, just heavy breathing. Then, silence. Robin didn't know what to do. All thoughts seemed to escape her. Glancing down to the clown, she raised an eyebrow, noticing the scared look on his face for the first time. Whispering out a small, "What is it?" she was met with a hand hastily pointing towards the wall. "He's there," Buggy whispered but with a stutter. "Who is?" she questioned back, curiosity getting the better of her. Before the clown could answer, a ragged yell sounded loudly from the door, alerting the two figures behind the wall as well as Robin and Buggy. Stumbling into view was the breathless swordsman. His eye widened at a sight the archaeologist and clown hadn't seen yet. He was looking at the other side of the wall. Before she could question why he had come tumbling through the door, the swordsman stepped back, his face tinted in bewilderment. "You're..." he slowly muttered, his eyes slowly narrowing. So I guess Buggy wasn't lying then. Instead of questioning what he had meant by that, Robin chose to step out from behind the wall, only for her own eyes to widen at the sight of a figure standing on the far side of the room. The figure's face was one that she'd seen and heard about for the past 2 years. One that would constantly remind her of how she had once failed her captain. It was a face that she wished she could bring back for the sake of her captain, after seeing how much he'd changed over 2 years. It was a face that before today, she'd thought she'd never see. The face of her captain's deceased older brother, Light. It was something which the trio of wanderers found glorious after stumbling about in the tunnels of Dressrosa for what seemed like days, whereas in fact, it had been 2 hours. Twitching, Marco blinked, his eyes focused on the steps before him. "Oi," he muttered out, eyeing the brunette who had been leading the group. "Weren't we just underground?" Turning her head, Koala stared at the man, her eyebrows almost narrowing. "Yes, we were." Feeling another twitch coming on, the blonde sighed, pointing towards the stairs with tired look. "Last time I checked, stairs that go up are not usually found underground. In fact, it would really help if you told us where we were going." Smirking, Koala simply shrugged her shoulders. Watching as she took her first step up the stairs, Marco gritted his teeth, his fists clenching. "How long do we have to keep following, yo? Are you a pirate?" Interrupting his words was a much more childish voice which could quickly be recognized as the straw-hatted teen who completed the trio. With a lighter smile spreading across her lips, Koala tilted her head, seemingly thinking to herself, "Ah, I never told you, did I?" "Oi." Tilting his head in union, Luffy pouted, following the brunette up the stairs. "Tell us what. Are you even listening to me?" Giggling with an innocent tune, Koala hummed as she threw both her hands behind her back, crossing her fingers over tightly. "Oh, I don't know whether I should say. After all, I could get in a lot of trouble for telling you." Letting out a deep breath, Marco sighed, placing his palm on his head. Those idiots were ignoring him, though. Watching as the rubber teen threw his hands in the air, the blonde found himself smiling, his eyes fixed on the 2 younger idiots, letting out a small muffled laugh quietly between his lips. The blonde reached into his pocket, his eyes almost glazed over. "Oi, Marco." Glancing his eyes over to where the call sounded, the blonde sighed, his eyes automatically narrowing towards the brunette. "What is it now, Thatch?" An almost wild grin instantly crossed the cook's lips as he made his way over to the blonde, latching onto the ship's rail with a chuckle. "You have to admit it, I'm a genius." Blinking, Marco continued to stare at Thatch, his eyebrow raising in confusion. "You, a genius?" Chuckling once more, the brunette placed a hand on his chest, dramatically nodding his head in agreement. "Yep." Blankly staring at the other, the blonde sighed once more, a groaning voice echoing from his lips. "What have you done now?" "You should trust me a bit more, Marco, and who says I did anything?" "No one. But just by looking at your eyes I know you've done something which will end up with either me or you in trouble." Sweat dropping, Thatch leant over the side of the ship, a sigh falling out of his lips. "Am I really that see-through?" Replying to his brother with a small nod, Marco narrowed his eyes, also finding himself leaning against the rail. "So what have you done this time?" Grumbling slightly, the brunette shifted his eyes suspiciously towards the island they had docked at, then edgily towards Marco. "It wasn't just me." Spouting a pout on his lips, the cook turned completely away from the blonde, causing for Marco to furrow his eyebrows. "So Ace is involved as well?" Jumping at the name, Thatch stared at Marco with widened eyes before stepping back. How did you know, duh? Instinct. Replying with a bored tone, the blonde gritted his teeth. So what did you and Ace do this time? Blinking, Thatch's mind seemingly went blank, before his eyes lighted up to the same wicked glint they bared before. You wouldn't believe what we found on the island. Hearing a small chuckle echo from his lips in between his words, Marco narrowed his eyes, highly doubting that the two pirates legally found the item that his brother was talking about. So, what is it? Flinging a hand into his pocket, Thatch smiled innocently towards the blonde, pulling a small object out into his hand. This. Staring at the object, Marco blinked, his head almost tilting slightly. In his brother's hand laid a small stone. It wasn't anything significant to look at, other than the symbol etched on it looking vaguely similar. What is it? It's supposed to be this good luck thing, a mod jig that the locals worship for some reason, Thatch stated, his finger twirling the stone around in his hand. They were guarding this little thing like crazy, so me and Ace thought it would be a good idea to take it. Finishing off his words, Marco sighed once again. You don't even know what that thing is, Thatch. For all we know, it could be cursed. Hearing a small gulp echo from the brunette, the blonde took his eyes off the stone to stare at his brother, or was seemingly staring back with widened eyes. See, cursed. Before Marco could reply to the brunette, a foreign hand wrapped around his neck, another voice speaking into his ear. Hey Marco, did you see what me and Thatch found? It's pretty awesome, right? Glancing to the side, the blonde found himself staring at the familiar sight of the freckled second commander. A huge grin plastered on his face. Yeah, Thatch showed me. He answered, a slight annoyed tone echoing through his voice. You do know we'll have to give it back. Blinking, the fire thrower stepped back away from the blonde, his eyes startled. What? No way. I almost got shot by Caveman for that thing. Caveman? The locals here are weird, trust me. Placing a hand on the rail, the blonde narrowed his eyes before glancing at the stone. Why would you want it anyway? Because? Replying to the blonde with a small grin, Ace made his way over to the unusually quiet Thatch, his eyebrows raising. Oi, what's wrong with him? Jerking his thumb towards the brunette, the freckled man tilted his head. Oh, yeah, I might have told him that the stone was? It's cursed. Suddenly bouncing back to life, Thatch screamed into Ace's ear, causing for the fire thrower to jump back unexpectedly. Wha? Ace mumbled out, instantly turning towards Marco for answers. Suddenly getting an idea, the blonde nodded. Watching as his brother's eyes widened in union, Marco let a small smirk creep across his mouth. He's right. I heard that the stone was cursed whilst collecting supplies on the island. Hearing nothing but the shouts of their brothers in the background, Marco tried to hold in his laugh as he saw the brunette before him turn a light pale color. Ace not soon after. Here, you have it. Flinging the stone from his hands to Ace's, Thatch ducked behind the blonde, watching as the fire thrower's eyes doubled in size. Shit. I don't want it. Throwing the stone back towards Thatch, the brunette yelped, moving Marco directly in front of him, only for the stone to hit the blonde, right in the head. His eyes widening, Ace flung his hands up in the air, taking a step away from the suddenly glaring Marco. Hearing a small chuckle echo from behind him, the blonde felt his glare hardening. Kneeling down to pick up the stone, the blonde narrowed his eyes, taking the stone in his hand and holding it up towards the sun. Yelping, Thatch quickly scurried away from the blonde, making his way next to Ace. Oi. What are you doing? That thing's cursed. Glancing back down towards his brothers, Marco smiled, slowly placing the stone in his pocket. I'm going to keep it. As if he'd announced he wanted to join the Marines, Ace and Thatch stared widely at the blonde, their mouths slightly agape. Stepping forward slightly, Ace stuttered, his eyes directly on the pocket which contained the stone. You want to keep a cursed stone? With his eyebrows raising, the fire thrower looked up to face the blonde. Nodding, Marco let out a small chuckle, causing for the other two to step back in union. Ace muttered out, shaking his head, he's gone crazy. Clutching the blonde's shoulders with one hand, Thatch waved his palm in front of Marco rapidly, his eyes wild. How many fingers am OT answering Ace? Something's wrong. Don't If you touch him you'll be cursed too, what? Watching as the brunette rushed back to the fire thrower's side, Marco's small smile was still perched on his lips. As annoying as his family could be, he'd do anything to keep their minds at ease, even if it was from something he'd made up. After all, he didn't need any more good luck, he was happy where he was right there. He's not responding still, it's the stone. Marco, you have to listen to me. Don't let the stone control you, you're stronger than this. Even if it meant he was surrounded by idiots. Lifting the object out of his pocket, Marco's smile faded slightly, staring at the small stone in his hand. Oi, pineapple, blinking, the blonde took his attention away from the stone, realizing that at the top of the stairs stood both Koala and Luffy, staring at him expectantly. Uttering out a small, huh? The blonde blinked, realizing he was still at the bottom of the stairs. Are you coming with us? The rubber teen asked almost bluntly, his head tilting slightly. Clutching the stone tightly, Marco sighed, allowing for the previous small smile to creep its way onto his lips again. Dropping the stone back in his pocket, the blonde nodded, placing his foot on the first step. Yeah, he answered quietly, though it was heard by the other two. Then don't take so long, Koala muttered out, turning her back to the blonde once again with a smirk on her face. Nodding to the brunette's comment with a grin, Luffy stretched his arm out, grabbing the collar of Marco's shirt. Before the blonde had a chance to register what the rubber teen was about to do, he was zapped from his place, almost instantly at the feet of the duo. You'll get lost if you just stand there with a funny look on your face, Luffy stated, letting go of the blonde's shirt. Wincing, Marco straightened himself off the floor, yet another sigh escaping his lips. No matter where he went, he would always be surrounded by idiots. And he wouldn't have it any other way. It's been a while, Sabo. Hearing the words leave his brother's mouth, Sabo found himself at a loss for words, feeling his heart starting to race from underneath the cloak. It was him, not some look-alike or impersonator, but actually Ace. But that was impossible. Ace had died 2 years ago, in front of many spectators, one being his own younger brother. Heck, the whole world had heard of the deaths of Ace and Whitebeard, so how? Silently understanding the blonde's confusion, Ace stepped back, his movement bringing Sabo out of his thoughts and into reality. I know, the freckled man started, his voice softer than normal. Interrupting Ace before he had a chance to finish his sentence, Sabo threw his hands out to his side, his whole body still in shock. How are you even alive? Swallowing to regain his breaths, the blonde stared into his brother's eyes, guilt swimming in his own. I saw your picture, in the newspaper, you were dead. Seeing his brother twitch, the blonde watched as the freckled man scrunched up his hands, an unknowing look passing through his eyes. I know, I don't understand either. Staring at the man with disbelief, Sabo stumbled back slightly, his whole body shaking. Something wasn't right, something couldn't be right, there had to be something behind this that wasn't his deceased brother standing in front of him. But if it was, had he somehow survived the hit that seemingly killed him? Had some doctor cured him for a missing piece of his chest? Or had the Whitebeard crew kept Ace's secret up until now? Yes, there were many, many possibilities. So it was okay to believe him, to believe that Ace was really alive before him. He needed to investigate more, needed to silence the logical side that was screaming at him that this wasn't real. Does that mean you've been alive this whole time? Sabo almost whispered out, his heart still racing. Though his tone wasn't accusing in the slightest. Catching Ace's eye, Sabo stared at him, his pupils widened and fists clenched. Ace hadn't moved, his eyes still on Sabo's. Though something in his eyes told the blonde there was more to it than that, than Ace just being cured or kept away. Though it was a look that Sabo had yearned for silently throughout the 2 years, 10 years even. Breaking the heavy silence, Ace began to mumble to himself, his eyes darting away from contact. Well, not exactly, he answered awkwardly, his breath still short. I don't know how I'm, here. I was in the ground, and before I knew it I was sailing to this island where I found out where Luffy was, then I came here to find him. His breath still shaky and quiet, the freckled man looked up to the blonde, his pupils still widened, and then there's you. Feeling his stomach drop, Sabo glanced away, his eyes glazing over. That was going to be one story he wasn't looking forward to telling. It's a long story. Ace finally breathed out, his shoulders shrugging over in defeat. Taking his eyes off the ground, Sabo stared at his brother's figure, blinking to make sure what he was seeing was real. Feeling a streak of water fall from his eyes, the blonde looked down, a small smile spreading across his lips. That his brother was back, and it didn't matter how. Having just that was enough for him. "You still owe me an explanation later," Sabo stated with a smirk, his voice finally returning back to its normal tone. Blinking, Ace nodded, a smirk spreading on his own lips. "Same here." Before the blonde had a chance to respond, a foreign voice echoed through the room, quickly catching the attention of the brothers as they stared at the green-haired man who looked at a loss of words. "You're," was finally what the man had said after an awkward couple of seconds, his eye directly staring at Ace. Feeling suddenly defensive, Sabo stepped back, his arm hovering over the vacant spot where his staff previously was. Spotting it at the other side of the room, the blonde twitched, looking back towards the man before realizing there was more than one person in the room. It was a familiar feeling, which confused the blonde even more. Glancing over to Ace, Sabo saw the same look on his brother's face, though this one was directed right at the man. Whispering under his breath, the blonde edged slightly closer to the other, his voice hushed. "You know him?" With his eyes darting between the blonde and the figure, Ace nodded. "Why yeah, he's Luffy's." "So I guess Buggy wasn't lying then." Interrupting the fire thrower, the green-haired man sighed, seemingly looking to the side towards something. Twitching, Ace groaned, his body leaning over slightly in defeat. "That idiot already blabbed on me." Looking back up, the fire thrower glanced angrily to the side for a split second, before reattaching his attention to the man. Ignoring Ace's statement, Sabo narrowed his eyes, looking towards the wall where the man was previously staring. The blonde called out, his face stretching out into a frown. "I know you two are there." Hearing a small yelp squeak out from behind the wall, it wasn't long before a clown fell out to the side, causing Ace to raise his eyebrows. "Buggy?" he questioned out loud, causing for the clown to yelp once more and point to the freckled man with fright. "SC, I told you," he whined out, looking towards the green-haired man as he gestured towards Ace. "It's his G-ghost." Glancing instantly over to the ghost, Sabo narrowed his eyebrows, seemingly not thinking of that before. Twitching again, Ace looked directly at the blonde, before his eyes widening. "I'm not a ghost, are you sure?" the blonde found himself asking, his eyes suspicious of the other. Blinking, the fire thrower seemingly thought for a second, before looking back towards the blonde with a small pout. "I don't think so." A small chuckle escaping his lips, Sabo smiled, his head shaking. "You don't know whether you're a ghost or not." Replying to the blow a small smirk, Ace looked back towards the staring swordsman, before another voice hit the room, this time, a woman's. My, what a situation we have found ourselves in, Swordsman-san." His eyes widening, the blonde stared at the woman he had known all but a year ago, a smile meeting his gaze. "It's a pleasure to meet you again, Sabo-san." There was a commotion. And it was a big one, from what he could muster. Trying his best to lock his ears onto the voices around him, the man winced, a sharp breath instantly leaving his mouth. Glancing down to his chest, the man closed his eyes once more, a small frown etching on his lips. For now, he was useless. As much as he had tried, he couldn't move a muscle, something that came to annoy the man as he sat motionless, the pain still crawling up his chest. Ignoring the painful sensation for now, he decided to focus his ears on the voices once more, though little of the words he heard were audible. Everything said near the man was blurred, the voices slowly changing into mumbles. Then silence. All he could hear after that was the blood pumping through his veins, obviously agitated by the sudden wounds. Don't think about it. He had to get out of here. It was getting closer to the meeting time he'd made with the others. Mustering up the little energy he had, the man opened his eyes once more, his pupils glazed over with struggle. What he saw wasn't much of a picture, more like a puzzle, but it was the best he'd had. It was obvious he was inside, and that there was another person in the room. Feeling his eyes drooping over again, the man parted his lips, before allowing for them to shut drearily. There was another person in the room with him, For some reason, it didn't sit with the man right. He couldn't exactly remember what had happened prior to the events which led him to sitting in this room unconscious and undoubtedly in pain, but something inside of him clearly did. One more glance, that's all he needed. Wincing, the eyes open for the last time, the man found himself staring at his arms, unknowingly realizing the pressure he hadn't noticed on them before. They were chained to the chair, something which he quickly found uncomfortable and restraining. Rolling his eyes up, he instantly noted that the person who was previously standing at the far side of the room was no longer there. Instead, was a screen, a small hum echoing from it. Straightening his neck, the man stared at the screen, watching as pictures appeared of people running away, most likely the civilians of where he was. What it was that they were running away from was unclear, other than a colosseum standing proudly in the background. So that was the commotion from before. Drawing his lips into a frown, the man narrowed his eyes, his mind finally clearing. With the memories coming back slowly, the man tried to pull himself out of the chair, twitching as the chains held him in place. Gritting his teeth, the man looked around, trying to find where the figure had disappeared to. It was then that the screen grabbed the attention of the man once again, showing a bounty poster of a teen, one that was wearing a straw hat. His eyes widening, the man stared into the screen, reading the letters shown as another bounty appeared on the screen. Phoenix, Marco 750 million, Monkey D. Luffy 400 million. Wanted alive at all costs. Ace was in a complete mix of emotions. He didn't know what to feel. Whether to feel happy, sad, frustrated, angry, or the most strongest emotion he was currently feeling: confusion. Of course he was happy, Sabo was in front of him. But then came the confusion of how he was in front of him because Sabo had died 10 years ago. And to the look that Sabo was giving him, it was apparent that Ace should have died himself 2 years ago. Which of course he couldn't deny, he was still going through the shock of being alive himself. So what was he supposed to say to his brother who was expecting an explanation? Does that mean you've been alive this whole time? That question was repeating in his head endlessly in those few seconds of silence, unsure of what to say back to the blonde. No, that should be the simple answer, but then again, stop trying. A voice had been speaking to him throughout those 2 years in his grave, so it could be easily possible he was alive. But that just brought more confusion to the fire thrower. Just answer something already. Swallowing down all of his reasonable thoughts, Ace glanced away from Sabo's gaze, his own eyes staring directly at the floor. Mumbling out his words, the freckled man inwardly sighed, taking a deep breath. Well, not exactly. He started, watching as Sabo twitched at his voice. I don't know how I'm, well, here. Feelings the voice's stare on him harden, Ace gulped, shifting awkwardly to the side. I was in the ground, and before I knew it I was sailing to this island where I found out where Luffy was, then I came here to find him. That sounds ridiculous. Twitching at the voice's words, the fire thrower inwardly sighed. The best he could do was be honest. Confusion was screaming at him through every nerve, questions clouding his mind on the situation he had found himself in. There wasn't a better answer he could give, not one that Sabo wouldn't see through. And then there was Sabo himself. Glancing up towards where the blonde stood, Ace breathed out heavily, a defeated tone echoing through his words. And then there's you. Visibly seeing the panic suddenly rush through his brother, Ace blinked, his eyes glazing over slightly. As much as he wanted answers to his confusion, it just didn't seem to matter suddenly. He didn't need his answers now, not when he was staring at his long-dead brother. Letting a faint laugh leave his lips, Ace smiled softly, feeling his shoulders drop of tension. It's a long story. Watching his brother seemingly rummage through his thoughts, Ace held in his breath. To his surprise though, the blonde started to smirk, a familiar tone returning to his voice. You still owe me an explanation later. Instantly focusing all his mind on the later part, Ace let out the breath he was seemingly holding, a smile creeping on his own lips as he nodded towards Sabo. Same here. Suddenly interrupting any more of the fire thrower's thoughts was a different voice. Not one from the voice or Sabo, but one that was faintly familiar. Turning his head instantly to meet with the face of the voice, Ace's eyes widened, his mouth slowly falling agape at the sight. Oh shit. You're? The man started, his eyes staring directly into Ace's. Twitching at the sound, the fire thrower gulped, quickly throwing Zoro. Luz first made an awkward smile, one that was obviously not mirrored. Hearing Sabo closely whisper to him, Ace jumped, glancing towards the blonde. "You know him?" Darting his eyes in between Sabo and Zoro, the fire thrower nodded, his gaze still direct on the swordsman. "Why yeah, he's Luffy's." Watching as the swordsman opened his mouth to speak, Ace found himself interrupted again, his words instantly cut off. So I guess Buggy wasn't lying then. Feeling the intensity of the stare from the green-haired swordsman become stronger, the ex-commander almost missed the name of a certain clown being mentioned. Twitching, a small groan escaped Ace's lips as he leant over in defeat. "That idiot already blabbed on me," he muttered mostly to himself, though a familiar snort replied to his words. "I'm amazed that he didn't tell someone sooner." Glaring for a split second at the voice, the fire thrower inwardly sighed, before redetecting the stare that was echoing strongly from Zoro. Briefly glancing to the side, Ace spotted Sabo staring intensely at Wall, causing for the freckled man to raise an eyebrow. Instantly breaking the silence, the blonde called out, equally surprising both Ace and Zoro. "I know you two are there." Raising an eyebrow, Ace began to open his mouth to question what his brother was on about, before a small yelp sounded from behind the wall. A familiar yelp. His eyes suddenly widening, the ex-commander raised his eyebrows, stumbling out a call mainly to himself. "Buggy!" Appearing from behind the wall fell a yelping Buggy, his eyes also fixated on Ace as he pointed to the freckled man dramatically. "SC, I told you, it's his G-Ghost." Twitching at the name, AC, before feeling another stare on his back. Turning around, the fire thrower saw Sabo glancing at him curiously, causing for him to stutter in his words. "I'm not a ghost." "You wouldn't even realize if you were." Twitch. "Are you sure?" The confusion was coming back. After all, it could make sense. Ace didn't exactly know what he was. A dead man walking? A zombie? A ghost wouldn't be that far-fetched to the freckled ex-commander? Blinking, the fire thrower tilted his head, before staring back towards Sabo. "I don't think so." Watching his brother chuckled at his reply, Ace found himself grinning again. Shaking his head, the blonde muttered under his breath. "You don't know whether you're a ghost or not." Letting a small smirk etch onto his lips, the fire thrower allowed a small chuckle escape his lips, earning himself a smile from the blonde. My. With his smirk instantly falling, Ace blinked. Darting his pupils everywhere, the fire thrower raised an eyebrow. Only seeing Zoro and Buggy placed in front of him. Slowly glancing over to Sabo to make sure he was still there, Ace found his eyebrow raising further as he saw the blonde staring directly at the wall. What a situation we've found ourselves in, Swordsman-san. This time, Ace noticed it too. The voice was coming from behind the wall. Watching as a woman appeared from the side of the said wall, the fire thrower narrowed his eyes, instantly recognizing her. Of course, he hadn't heard much about her other than her name and her history. Nico Robin, a woman who was hunted down by the Marines simply for her existence, something the freckled man could sadly relate to. He'd also heard rumors that Luffy acquired her and had her join the crew, which, knowing Luffy, was probably true. However, what he wasn't expecting was Robin's next words, directed straight towards Sabo. "It's a pleasure to meet you again, Sabo-san." Everything was black. Being unconscious had a familiar feeling to the long-nosed pirate. It was different from sleeping, it had more of a dreamlike feel. After all, he could still hear the voices above him talking. He just couldn't put their words together. That was until one of the said voices flicked his nose, surprising the liar out from his sleep and head first into a boulder. "Ouch! That must have hurt." A female voice winced, her hand shaking in as she stared at the long-nosed pirate. Letting out a yell, Usopp placed his hand over his seemingly broken nose, tears streaming down his face. Blinking, the man gasped, standing up almost instantly as he suddenly noticed the two people standing next to him. Who are you?" he yelled out, still clutching his nose. "Your saviors," the man joked, causing for the girl to let out a snort. Stepping forward, the brunette waved her hand. A smirk placed on her lips. "Don't mind him, it would be best just to ignore him." Raising an eyebrow, Usopp automatically took a step back away from the woman. "I'm Haruta," she stated, before flinging a thumb behind her shoulder towards the man. That's Vista over there, and you are? Staring at the two for a few seconds, Usopp lowered his hand from his nose, nodding towards the duo. Usopp. His eyes suddenly glistening over, the long-nosed pirate stood suddenly proudly before the two. His previous demeanor instantly gone. I am a traveler who has defeated many, and is currently on a quest to find a Dragao. Standing in front of Usopp with a drawn face, Haruta pulled her finger away from the liar's nose, before passing him completely, seemingly looking through the rubble. She just flicked me again," Usopp yelled out, pointing towards Haruta with a red-hinted nose and shark teeth. Not seemingly caring, the brunette continued to look through the rubble, before getting back up once more and looking to her colleague. "He's not here either," she whispered out, her tone completely different from before. His eyebrow raising, Usopp tilted his head slightly, glancing at the rubble for a split second. "You're looking for someone?" Walking beside him, Vista nodded, bringing a hand to the back of his head. "I doubt he'd be lying in a small amount of rubble, Haruta. He'd obviously stand out a bit." Pouting, Haruta glared at the swordsman, turning her back to him. "I wouldn't put it past him." Sighing, Vista blinked, before his eyes widened. "Wouldn't it be better to check that?" Pointing, the swordsman gestured towards the previously unscathed tunnel lying behind the now broken wall. Blinking, Usopp mumbled under his breath, "You guys didn't know it was there?" Both simultaneously twitching at the same time, Haruta and Vista looked sheepishly to the side, causing Usopp to sweat drop. "Well, we might have found it if that idiot didn't bring the whole freaking wall down on us," Haruta screamed out, seemingly losing her mind, causing both Usopp and Vista to take a step back. How long have you two been here?" Usopp questioned, his voice almost a squeak. "Too long," Vista responded, turning towards Usopp with a faded eyes and a twitching smile. Letting out a nervous smile, the long-nosed pirate backed away from the duo, his eyes landing on the tunnel. "You know what? I think I hear my friends calling me, so you know, I'll just go." Darting away, the long-nosed pirate yelped, and hand-grasping his shoulder harshly. "I don't think your friend's doing much calling," Vista stated, his hand patting Usopp's shoulder. Blinking, Usopp's eyebrow raised questioningly as he looked towards the swordsman for answers. What do you mean?" Hearing a small chuckle behind him, the long-nosed pirate turned around to face Haruta, who was holding a small, passed-out gnome by her fingers. "This is your friend, right?" His eyes widening, Usopp rushed over to the brunette, scooping his hands together as the little gnome fell onto his fingers. "I forgot all about him." Her eyebrows raising, Haruta glanced briefly between Vista and the long-nosed man. "Oh," she muttered, placing her hands on her hips. "I thought you were just about to go out looking for him." Smirking as Usopp twitched beside her, Haruta made her way over to the opening of the tunnel, hesitantly peeking in. "Oi, Vista," she called out, slowly turning her head to face him. Raising his eyebrow in response, the swordsman started to walk towards the brunette, completely forgetting the long-nosed man accompanied by them. Seeing Vista approach her, Haruta let out a small smile, peering down the tunnel once more. "We've searched the highs and lows of this place," he muttered through gritted teeth. "But we haven't found him yet, which means he's not here." Finishing her words, Vista found himself mirroring the smile on the brunette's face. "You think he found this tunnel?" Shrugging, Haruta let out a small sigh. It's entirely possible that idiot always had unexplainable luck in situations like this. Suddenly twitching, the brunette frowned before silently glancing to the side. Finally speaking up, the long-nosed pirate seemingly snapped the two Whitebeard commanders out of their thoughts, instantly bringing their attention towards him. "Thanks, Yano, for dragging me out, but..." Awkwardly placing the knocked-out gnome on his shoulder, Usopp made his way over to where the two commanders were standing, his voice becoming squeakier as his shoulders began to shake. "I really must be going now, gotta find those dragons and all." Raising her eyebrow, Haruta stared at the long-nosed pirate, her eyes blinking in thought. "You're looking for a dragon?" Twitching, Usopp waved his hand as he let out a shaky laugh. "Dragons? Who mentioned dragons?" "You," Haruta stated blankly. Twitch. "He's looking for his friends," a foreign voice called out, echoing from the long-nosed man's shoulder. "They left us behind and went searching for something in those tunnels. The cheerful gnome rubbed his eyes rashly, instantly propping himself up on Usopp's shoulder. A grin etched on his lips. Have you seen anyone pass through here? Tilting his head, Vista shook his head, ASMA lips. We haven't seen anyone, it's just Binus and AC our friend who's been down here all day. Sighing, Usopp's shoulders sagged, ignoring the glare the brunette directed at the swordsman. Shaking her head, Haruta looked back towards the long-nosed liar, her eyebrow lifting for a second. We're looking for our friend as well, she stated, a small grin growing on her lips. So you might as well tag along with us. Who knows, we might actually bump into our friend whilst searching for yours. Blinking, Usopp's eyes widened. Really, you do that? Nodding, the brunette quickly looked towards Vista, earning a small nod from him in return. Sure, it doesn't really affect us if you come or not, it's just that, she muttered, placing a hand on her chin. You'll have to keep this a secret. A secret? Nodding, the brunette turned away from the liar, slowly stepping into the tunnel. Just keep an open mind when it comes to our friend, okay, if anyone asks. Speaking up, Vista followed after Haruta before turning back to look at Usopp. This never happened. Okay, Haruta finished, the smirk still etched on her lips. Nodding hesitantly, Usopp quickly glanced at the small gnome still standing on his shoulder. Seeing the small man nod in return, the sharpshooter stepped forward, entering the tunnel once more, sure. His eyes glazing over, Usopp tilted his head, a question whispering out of his lips. Why would I need to keep an open mind? Who could the friend be? Hearing this, the small gnome's eyes widened. Maybe their friend is the dragon. Twitch, it's a pleasure to meet you again, Sabo-san. Blinking, the fire thrower stared at the blonde who looked easily as surprised as him. Hearing a small sigh leave Sabo's mouth, Ace chose to look back towards Nico Robin, his eyebrows raised. Robin? Continuing to smile, the archaeologist made her way over towards the green-haired swordsman as he slowly tilted her head. Yes, she replied, her smile dropping slightly as her eyes landed onto Ace's. Twitching at the stare, Ace shifted, directing his eyes to the suddenly very interesting floor. Hearing the voice chuckle slightly, the fire thrower glared towards it, ignoring the confusion appearing on Zoro's face. Well, it's just I'm surprised to see you. That's all. Sabo huffed out, his hand making its way up towards his forehead. Grunting, Zoro stepped forward as his eyes narrowed straight towards Ace. Well, that makes something we both have in common. Looking up from the floor, Ace awkwardly lifted up his hands, a small, shaky smile appearing on his lips. It's been a while. Zoro, isn't it? Hearing that, the green-haired swordsman turned his stare slowly into a glare, causing for the fire thrower to twitch. Crossing his arms, the voice tilted its head slightly, its own eyebrows furrowing. He doesn't look too happy to see you. I figured. Ace whispered back, causing for Zoro to look between the wall and ex-commander in confusion. Zoro? Sabo questioned out loud, thankfully pushing off the swordsman's attention from Ace for a split second. Oh. He mumbled, placing his fist in one hand. You're Roronoa Zoro. HMPH. The voice grunted, its face looking directly away from the blonde. With his eyebrow ticking up, Zoro nodded before placing both his hands on his hips. And you are? He asked, his temper seemingly running short. Ah, yes, I haven't introduced myself yet. I am. Before Sabo had a chance to finish his words, the swordsman interrupted him, looking back towards the ex-Whitebeard commander. How are you even here? With his tone brisk and dead, Zoro took a step towards the fire thrower, causing Ace to step back slightly. Yep, he's definitely not happy to see you, the voice stated, a snort echoing from its lips. Glancing in between the voice and the swordsman, Ace gritted his teeth, his own eyes narrowing towards Zoro. I can explain. He started, though the swordsman didn't seem to budge. You died in the war, he stated bluntly with a questionable tone, causing for Ace, Sabo and the voice to twitch simultaneously. Feeling his mouth go dry, Ace simply shrugged his shoulders, still staring at the swordsman. I'm just as about confused as you are. Narrowing his eyebrows in confusion for a split second, the swordsman seemed to scan Ace's appearance before letting out a small sigh. Well, we found what we was looking for. Looking away from the fire thrower, Zoro brought his attention onto Robin as a small scowl formed on his face. So, what now? Hushing Zoro's question almost instantly, the archaeologist looked around the room, her eyes blurred. Catching this, Sabo raised an eyebrow. Is something wrong, Robin? Not bothering to look towards the blonde, Robin's eyes landed on the door the trio had just passed through. Eyes suddenly widening, she took a step forward, staring intently on the two brothers. We need to get out of here, fast. But before anyone had the chance to question or move, the door was blown instantly off its hinges, revealing a group of Marines on the other side. His eyes widening, Sabo swallowed sharply. Damn it. The sound of heavy footsteps filled the cobbled room, the pirates and revolutionaries inside bracing themselves for the fight they'd have to put up. Instantly looking behind him, Sabo yelled. His words laced in concern. They're surrounding us. We need to get out of here now. The rest of the group were unable to respond, as the Marines began to charge at them, shouting their commands. Surrender now, Straw Hat pirates. Slamming his fist into his hand, Ace smirked, sparks flying off his fingers. I'm no Straw Hat pirate, but I'm sure as hell not surrendering. Quickly pulling his hood over his face, the ex-commander raised off the ground. I've been itching to have a fight for years. Her eyebrow raising, Robin briefly glanced towards the fire thrower. Shaking any thoughts off, she quickly crossed her hands over her chest, preparing for the fight ahead. Noting this, Zoro brushed his hand over the tips of the swords hanging beside him. His eye locked onto the Marines. Anyone got a plan? Yeah, Sabo spoke, his tone still doubtful, but you're probably not gonna like it. Another boom hit the room, though this time coming from behind the group of pirates. More sounds of footsteps echoed from every corner of the room, bringing the blonde to frown even more. Well? Buggy screeched, reaching for the knives hidden beneath his cloak. Seemingly not waiting for a response, the first group of Marines charged towards the group, their swords swinging in the air. Blocking their attacks with ease, Zoro glanced over to the blonde, knocking the Marines to the ground in one swift move. What is it? That's our exit. Pointing towards the door at the far side of the room, Sabo elbowed a Marine from behind. Gesturing to the mass of soldiers coming from behind him. They've found the tunnels, we can't go back in there. By now, they're probably packed with Marines waiting for us to run into their trap. That exit, the one we just came from? Buggy exclaimed, his voice breaking. We've just escaped from there, now you're expecting us to go back out there? Frowning, Robin glanced towards Buggy. It seems we don't have any other choice, though. Whispering under her breath, she looked over to the door. Wouldn't the Colosseum be the inferior option? From what we saw, it looked like it was the main place the Marines were heading. Hearing this, Sabo grimaced, though shook his head. Either way is bad, but, smiling, he gestured towards his brother and Zoro. Would you rather fight in tunnels, or a Colosseum? Understanding his point, Robin nodded, cracking the necks of the Marines she had in her hold. The Colosseum it is then. So our plan is to just fight through them? Buggy stuttered, snot dropping from his nose. Throwing fire from his fingertips, Ace's grin grew. The flames eating up the Marines standing in the way of the door. Sounds like it. Ignoring the high-pitched yelp from the clown, Zoro smirked, placing Watto in his mouth. I happen to love that plan. Not waiting for the others to follow, the green-haired man took lead, slicing his way through the crowds of Marines charging at him. Watching with a hesitant look still on his face, Sabo sighed. It's not going to be easy, considering the vast amount of Marines that lay waiting outside, but... Looking towards Ace, Sabo smiled, his eyes scanning every feature of the grinning ex-commander. I guess anything can happen. Trafalgar Law's day wasn't going to plan. This didn't particularly surprise the ex-Shichibukai, but it certainly didn't sit well with him. Doflamingo had already defeated and captured him, from what he could remember. For reasons unknown, his memories were blurred and gone, his mind unable to focus on the exact details before the fight. Everything was going wrong, they were spiraling out of control, and all he could do was watch. Watch from the chair he had found himself handcuffed to. His eyes were glued to the screen in front of him, showing a series of events that shocked the doctor. Are those Marines? They were everywhere, scurrying around in immense, overwhelming groups all over Dressrosa. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't remember them being there beforehand. before the exchange of Cesar and Doflamingo's status. Was that the reason they are here? And that wasn't the only thing that surprised Law. The screen lit up with images of a tall coliseum, spilling with Marines that were battling their way through the crowds to get inside. Was there something important in there? No, there had to be. The doctor didn't have to question long about what was inside, as the next images that hit the screen, causing Law's eyes to widen. Battling their way through the crowds of Marines were three familiar faces, ones that caused Law to shout out in shock. What the hell are they doing there? Fighting the Marines was none other than the other members taking part in the drastically failing plan. Zoro. Robin, what are you doing? He questioned to himself, confused in seeing Buggy the Clown amongst the group as well. It wasn't a huge surprise to Law that the crew he'd traveled with would at some point deter from the original plan, but for this many Marines to be loitering around Dressrosa, all whilst he was chained to a chair hopelessly watching, none of this was going well at all. Shaking his head, Law groaned, his arms instinctively struggling against the sea stone wrapped around him. Frustrated, he yelled out, unsure if anyone would answer. Hello? With only his voice echoing back to him, the doctor gritted his teeth. The reality of his situation slowly setting in. He was sure there was someone in the room with him before, watching him whilst he was semi-conscious. Could it have been Doflamingo, or one of his lackeys? Either way, the doctor didn't want to wait around, his heart beginning to race as he heard footsteps approach the room. Yo, is someone in there? Not expecting such a casual remark, Law faltered, his head trying to look over his shoulder towards where the voice was coming from. In here. He replied calmly, accepting that he'd have better chances of understanding his situation with another person's input. Ah, Law, what are you doing here? His tone still friendly, the voice stomped over to Law, a defeated old man in hand. Weren't you meant to be at Greenbit by now? Gazing up, the doctor found himself at the familiar sight of the Straw Hat Crew's shipwright. Frankie? He questioned, surprised at the unlikely appearance. What's happened? How long have I been gone? Huh? The cyborg uttered, lifting up his shades to reveal his raised eyebrows. Well, what have you been doing here this whole time? Gonna be honest, I didn't take you as the napping kinda guy. I wasn't having a nap, Law shouted back, surprised at his reaction. Seemingly not believing it, Frankie, his head shaking with disappointment, gesturing towards the screen in behind him. Look, I don't blame you. But if the others knew that you were just sitting back watching some screen whilst it's going crazy out there, they'd be pissed. It's not cool, man. I told you, I wasn't. Don't worry, I'll keep it secret. Frankie interrupted, pointing towards himself with a grin. This is just between us. Oh, holding up the battered old man in his hand, the cyborg winced. And this guy? His eyes widening, Law stuttered, his tone in disbelief. Is that Lao Ji? Shrugging his shoulders, Frankie let go of the man, ignoring the shudder the building took as he hit the ground. Ah, so his name is Lao Ji. That explains this super shirt. I bumped into him on the way here. Folding his arms, the cyborg continued. Boy, was he not happy to see me. Is anyone else here? Law questioned, his memories slowly coming back to him. Sensing the desperation in Law's voice, Frankie shook his head. Not that I know of. This place is pretty deserted. Only came here to avoid the Marines. It seems like they're avoiding this building. They're avoiding it? His eyes furrowing, he let out a small murmur. That can't be good. Surprised, Frank's Law. Huh, really? Yeah. Sighing, the doctor gripped his fists, his teeth gritting. It can only mean that the Marines and Doflamingo are still working together. And that would only be possible if Doflamingo had lied about quitting the Shichibukai. Law shivered, his emotions slowly boiling as the realization of his mistake set in. Slamming his fist as high as he could whilst restrained, Law yelled out, surprising Frankie. Damn it. Whoa bro, calm down. Hold up. Have you been handcuffed to that chair? Frankie asked confusedly, though his words fell on deaf ears. Of course he'd planned something like this. Law whispered out, his eyes shadowed. He'd been played. Everything that he'd been working towards had been pointless. It should have been obvious that Doflamingo wouldn't give up just like that. He should have seen this coming. Our plan has failed. Catching this, Frankie smashed the side of the stone, jolting Law from his thoughts. Nothing's failed yet. The cyborg yelled out, causing Law to ignore the cracks being formed that slowly freed his arm from the chair. So what if there's a few Marines hanging around? It's nothing we haven't seen before. Placing his shades back over his eyes, Frankie let out a pose, a smirk crawling onto his lips. Don't put down the ability of our crew just yet. Blinking, Law stared at the cyborg, unable to respond. Continuing, Frankie chuckled. Once our captain set his mind to something, there's no getting out of it. So sorry, there's no more time for you to be sitting round napping. Twitch. Let's go take that flashy bastard down. Seemingly content with his performance, Frankie sent Law a wide grin. Sighing once more, Law nodded, flexing his fingers as a small smile crept onto his face. You're right. Slowly standing up from the chair that he'd been laying on for way too long, the doctor stretched, his eyes falling onto the screen once more. I suggest we go join them. They might know more about our current situation. It'll give us a chance to regroup and change our plan. Letting out a sigh to mirror the doctor's, Frankie deflated. Man, you with your plans. Fine, let's go join Hey, that's Zoro and Robin. You're quick to notice things. Law murmured to himself, readjusting his hat. They're at the Coliseum. Nodding, Frankie's eyes widened. I know, I was there today with Luffy. Twitch. Law groaned. And why was that? Don't be surprised, of course he wouldn't follow the plan. Ah, his brother's devil fruit was being bargained off as a prize there. Frankie replied, his tone somber. I wonder how Zoro and Robin got there though, they're normally pretty good at avoiding trouble. And yet the one who attracts the trouble is not there. Law stated, his eyes searching for the familiar rubber captain. Oh, it seems like Buggy found his way there too. Pointing towards the screen, Frankie furrowed his eyebrows. There's two others with them too, the guys in cloaks. Know who they are? No, I don't. Shaking his head, Law turned towards the exit, ignoring the fallen Lao Ji on the floor. It doesn't concern me, as long as they're on our side. Right. Frankie agreed, his eyes locked onto the duo in white. Let's hope so, it seems like they're pretty strong. It also looks like one of them won the tournament. I hope Luffy's okay with that. Stopping in his tracks, Law tilted his head, turning towards Frankie. One of them has the Mera Mera no Mi. Frankie nodded, not noticing the confused stare he was receiving from the doctor. Yeah, seems like he's picking it up pretty well. Passing Lao Ji, the cyborg joined Law at the exit, pumping himself up for the fight. Y'all ready? His eyes shadowed, Law frowned. That shouldn't be possible, not if what I heard was right. Shaking his head, he gave out a long sigh, nodding towards Frankie as he continued exiting the room. I'm probably mistaken. Law whispered under his breath, hoping that it wouldn't be an issue later on. Usopp had always been an incredibly cautious, not frightened, he reminded himself, person in life. In fact, it was one of his most notable traits. But to his dismay, as he was walking through the eerie barren tunnels that were hidden under Dressrosa, he wished he'd been more cautious of who he was traveling with. To say the duo that had saved him were strange would be an understatement. It wasn't like the long-nosed pirate wasn't used to meeting bizarre people on his adventures. Some of them even became his crewmates. But the two strangers were, to put it mildly, unnerving. Everything had been fine at first. After all agreeing to help find each other's friends, they had set off. Silently, albeit but determined to find their way out of the tunnels. To fill the silence, he'd opted to studying the two strangers, noting down the constant exchanges they gave each other as well as the looming awkwardness in the lack of conversation. He knew something was up, that in the midst of his rescue that he'd interrupted something important. But he was too cautious to question, so watching them it was. How do you think the others will react? One of the strangers finally spoke up, the one who'd previously addressed herself as Haruta. Her words were whispered, very obviously only to be heard by her partner. She was fidgeting, not that Usopp could blame her, these tunnels screamed danger, her mind seemingly elsewhere. Her top-hatted partner sighed in response, throwing Usopp a quick glance. Maybe this isn't the time to talk about that. And what? There's a better time. Vista, do you realize what's just happened? This changes everything, she exclaimed, her eyes still frantically searching the different pathways the tunnel took. This weight that we've been carrying for the last few years, know the weight that Marco's been Interrupting her, Vista waved his hand. The girl's enthusiasm clearly not mirrored. Haruta, enough. It's too early to be saying anything like that. Blinking, Haruta turned towards the swordsman. Why aren't you acting the same way? Is something wrong? Before Vista had a chance to reply, she continued. I mean, I know that we've just lost him, again, but isn't this something to be elated about? You're not exactly acting like we've just seen someone we thought was dead. It's a big deal. It is a big deal. Vista shot out, a frown etching onto his lips. But I don't think you've realized our situation. What's just happened shouldn't have been possible. I know that, Haruta uttered, her words sounding unconvinced. But as I said earlier, you didn't see the condition his grave was in. The moment I saw it I thought. That he was alive? Interrupting once again, the swordsman shook his head. Slowly forgetting the soft tone the duo were previously speaking in. When was the last time you heard of someone who's been confirmed dead for 2 years, crawl out of their own grave in perfect health? Are you not even slightly suspicious of his story? I mean the chances of us bumping into him here, with the tournament on. It all just seems so, his words failing him. Vista gripped his fist, refusing to look his partner in the eye. Silently walking behind, Usopp had a feeling the duo had forgotten he was there. Gulping, the sharpshooter tried his best to not audibly react to what they were saying, his mind running wild with the information he'd just overheard. Who had crawled out of their grave? Wait, nope, he didn't want the answer to that. Glancing down to the small gnome that was currently resting in his pocket, he was met with mirrored concern that was filling his eyes. Swallowing hard, Usopp shook his head, trying hard to keep his presence down. All I'm saying, the man picked up again, catching the attention of his partner who'd been suspiciously quiet in his response, is that we shouldn't trust him, just for now. The only thing worse than this not being what we think it is having Marco and the others believing in this so-called miracle. Then what? Haruta finally said, her eyes glancing towards Vista. What else could this be? 'Cause from what I see it is us. I doubt he's some zombie controlled by some evil mastermind. You've just been reading too many horror stories. Zombies? Usopp shuddered, the memories of Thriller Bark racing back to mind. He'd already had his fair share of experiences with zombies. He was in no rush to repeat that again, he'd take finding a dragon any day. Letting out a sad laugh, the swordsman shook his head. It's not like that. Placing her hands on her hips, Haruta nodded, a pout forming on her lips. Yes it is. Too much. Can we just, she faltered, for 1 minute be happy about this? I'm trying. Visa said, another sigh escaping his lips. I want nothing more than for this to be alright. There's just too many questions unanswered to start celebrating just yet. Not to mention, pausing, the swordsman examined a passage to the left of him. Was it just me, or was he talking to himself back there? You noticed that? Haruta replied, her tone surprised. It totally freaked me out, though I was too distracted to say anything. Should I just leave? Usopp pondered to himself, ultimately deciding that he'd been completely forgotten about. He didn't have enough courage, no, he was just cautious to dare interrupt them during their chat. But after listening to the discussion, he'd concluded that getting away from these two seemed like the safest option. He planned just to step away, lose himself in one of the many passageways and hope for the best that he'd bump into Zoro down there. However, the gnome in his pocket had other plans. Do you guys even know where you're going? It yelled out, causing for the strolling duo in front to pause in their steps, their eyes widening as they turned to meet Usopp. Smothering the gnome's mouth with his finger, Usopp yelped, his hand frantically trying to cover the source of the noise. Shut up, he stammered out, flailing as the gnome fought back. Hey, what are you doing? It screamed, squirming in the sharpshooter's hands. Damn, Haruta whispered out, her eyes blinking rapidly. I forgot about him. Turning to her partner, she winced. Think he heard everything? Mirroring the awkward wince, Vista gritted his teeth. I think so. Though thankfully, letting another laugh out, the swordsman approached Usopp, smacking him swiftly on the back. It's not like we said anything damning, right? Yelping once more, Usopp fell back, letting the gnome fall to the floor. No, nothing. I'm basically deaf, can't hear a word. Laughing weakly, the sharpshooter sent Vista a smile, relieved to see a nod in response. Sure, Haruta uttered, leaning down to pick up the creature which was squirming on the floor, her eyes studying intensely, her eyebrow raised. What even are you? Shaking off his fall, the gnome stood up on the girl's palm, sending her a cheerful smile. I'm a dwarf from the Tontata tribe. The name's Flapper. It's nice to meet you. Are you zombies? Ignoring the last part, Haruta pondered. The Tontata tribe? I've heard stories about them. Never actually thought there was any truth to them. Forgetting his fear for a moment, Usopp straightened up, glancing towards the gnome. No wait, it's a dwarf. Your name is Flapper? He questioned, his tone surprised. Yep, Flapper exclaimed, sending a thumbs up to the sharpshooter. And it's a pleasure to be in the presence of someone like you, the great Usoland. Raising an eyebrow, Haruta glanced towards Usopp. The great Usoland? Shaking his hands, Usopp's sweat dropped, a grin subconsciously making its way across his lips. Ah, pay no mind to that. Just something my followers call me, he claimed, unable to stop digging a hole for himself. Followers? Vista questioned, starting to walk once more. You famous or something? Gulping, Usopp refused to look towards the grinning Tontata, instead opting to look at the ground. And not quite. I'm part of a crew. Mumbling his words, the sharpshooter shook his word, trying to regain his composure. A pirate crew. The Straw Hat Pirates. Why can't I just keep my mouth shut for once? Placing the Tontata in her pocket for safety, Haruta looked up, a surprised look crossing her face. The Straw Hat Pirates? Instantly sending a glance to Vista, she continued. Is your captain here in Dressrosa? Why yeah. Usopp answered, unsure about how much to say. You know Luffy? Shaking her head, Haruta started pacing forward, her head turning away from Usopp. No, just curious. It was obvious from her tone that there was more to it than that, but Usopp decided that going off the previous conversation he overheard, he'd best leave it. After all, Luffy was strong and crazy enough to match these people. He had as much faith in that as he did in own lies. Thinking back, Usopp smiled. The reminder in Luffy's faith in them as a crew regaining some courage in his venture. And as if fate was listening into Usopp's thoughts, Vista yelled out, alerting the brunette and Liar. I think I see something. Both quickly rushed over towards Vista, their hopes of escaping the tunnels raising as their eyes locked onto the light beaming from a crack in the ceiling. Finally, running her hands over the break in the wall, Haruta jumped up, her eyes meeting Vista's. Think we can break our way through here? Usopp glanced towards Vista, waiting for a reply. Though to his surprise, the swordsman didn't match the brunette's enthusiasm, seemingly troubled by something. Wait, he ordered, pushing Haruta back from the wall. Something's up. Ignoring the confused replies from his partner, the swordsman peeked through the crack. What the? He mumbled, his head cocking to the side. Before he had a chance to question, Usopp jolted, a loud screaming echoing down the tunnel. Though to the sharpshooter's dismay, it wasn't coming from the passageways. No, they're coming from. Pressing his head against the wall the crack was situated on, Usopp's eyes widened. The scream came from the other side of this wall. There's more of them, Usopp exclaimed, glancing towards Vista for answers. What's happening? Haruta questioned, looking everywhere for the source of the noise. Pushing his eyes away from the crack, the swordsman gulped, twiddling with his mustache nervously. I think it might be safer to stay on this side of the wall for now, he claimed, a shocked look crossing his eyes. It's teeming with Marines out there, the streets are filled with them. Huh? Usopp yelped, confused at what the swordsman was claiming. The Marines are here? Stunned by this, Haruta stepped back. What are they doing here? I thought Dressrosa was protected by that Shichibukai guy. Gulping, the sharpshooter turned towards the brunette. You mean Doflamingo? Seeing a nod in return, Usopp placed a hand at the back of his head, a nervous smiling appearing on his face. Yeah, about that. He kinda resigned today. Not that we had anything to do with it, aha. Damn it. Vista uttered. That was unexpected. Finding our friends might not be the hardest thing we had to do today. Yeah, Haruta mumbled, turning towards the pathway beside the cracked wall. This makes finding them as quickly as possible all the more important. We need to find a different way out of here. Look over there. Raising her hand, the brunette pointed to the stairway which to Usopp's disappointment, was near enough destroyed. What about those? Sighing, the swordsman examined the stairs, an uncertain looks crossing his eyes. They don't look the safest, but we don't have another choice, do we? Haruta finished, glancing towards Usopp for agreement. Reluctantly, the liar nodded. So much for being cautious. So, just to be sure, you both don't have any clue where your crews are right now. Seeing this synchronized nod from the two pirate captains, Koala gave out a heavy sigh. This was going to be a lot more work than she had first anticipated. She hadn't thought two well-respected captains of crews such as the Whitebeard Pirates and Straw Hat Pirates would be that careless in leaving their crew to wander. But here she was. Seeing no for sure that they're in Dressrosa. Luffy chimed in, giving the impression that it helped Koala. It did not. Leaning on the wall, Marco looked away from Koala, noticing the irritation coming off the revolutionary. The last time I saw my crew stationed at the East Dock. They've definitely moved from there by now, most likely towards the outskirts of Balsa. Though I can't say for sure. Waving her pen in the air, Koala let out a sigh. Yes, that's what I wanted to hear. At least it's something. Scribbling down a cross on her notebook, the revolutionary groaned. The lack of information voiding her plan. If only we knew where their main plan of attack was. You said that our crews were in danger, right? So let's go already, Luffy exclaimed, bouncing around, unable to stick to one spot. Ignoring the rubber captain, Koala continued to mumble to herself. If it had been the Colosseum, then there's no way we would have escaped so easily. Clicking her fingers, she once more glanced towards the blonde. Wait, if you're not sure on where your ship is docked, how do you normally find out? Normally, I would have a transponder snail on me, Marco replied. Smiling, Koala jumped up from the ground. Great, why didn't you tell me earlier you had one on you? Frowning, the blonde shifted. Because I don't. I left without one this morning. Twitch. Falling to the ground, the bob-hatted girl gripped her face in frustration, her emotions getting the better of her. Of course you did. She wailed out, closing her notebook. That's fine, we'll just have to improvise on our getaway. Improvise? Marco questioned, his eyebrow raising. That doesn't sound great. Sending him a dirty glare, Koala pouted. Yeah, well I said the same thing about this entire scheme. Turns out Sabo doesn't like to be told his plans suck. Luffy halted from his bouncing, a certain name catching his attention. Huh? Sabo? Darting over to where Koala was kneeling. The rubber captain peered over her shoulder. Leaning in closer to make sure he had heard right. What did you say? Noticing her fumble, Koala edged away from the teen, a hand covering her mouth. Oops. From what she gathered from Sabo's feeling towards his brother, she was pretty sure he didn't want her to spill the fact that he was alive to the teen until it was assured that everyone was safe. To her annoyance, the blonde was far too worried about Luffy's reaction. I'm guessing stupid runs in the family. Wait, do you hear that? Marco questioned, bringing Koala out from her thoughts. Though the revolutionary didn't have to listen out for long. Within seconds of his question, the stairway's roof began to quake, bringing Koala to her feet with the Straw Hat Captain covering in front of her. Someone's coming, Luffy stated, gripping his fists. Before Koala had any time to prepare, an immense thud rocked the building. Glancing up, the revolutionary winced, stunned at the crack that was slowly appearing through the ceiling. Marco instantly kicked the two teens to the side, narrowly avoiding the blocks of cement that fell to the ground without warning. Grabbing Koala, Luffy extended his stomach, crashing into the side softly. It's you, the rubber captain muttered, wiping the dust from his mouth. Following his gaze, Koala peered up to the ceiling, her heart dropping at who she saw. A figure slowly appeared standing on the outside of the building, harboring a terrorizing smirk with an outfit that were recognizable throughout the world. Straw Hat. He started, his voice calling out tauntingly. I sensed you hadn't wandered far. Staring back at the trio, stood the former Shichibukai dressed in pink feathers and shades, Doflamingo.